panel is composed of Palestinian and Arab organizers, workers, elders, and loved ones. Please join us in welcoming our amazing judging panel, who we will get to know better later in this trial. On jurisdiction, the People's Court, established to address the gravest of international crimes and crimes against humanity, operates under a framework of international and national laws that confer jurisdiction over individuals accused of committing genocide. This court has universal jurisdiction established by the Geneva Convention, of which both Israel and the U.S. are signatories of. This is based on the notion that some crimes, such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity alleged here today, are so exceptionally grave that they affect the fundamental interests of the international community and of humanity as a whole. The court is enabled by universal jurisdiction to prosecute individuals for such crimes regardless of where the crime was committed, the nationalities of the perpetrators, or the nationalities of the victims. Jurisdiction over U.S. officials is also conferred by territorial jurisdiction. The People's Court claims jurisdiction over crimes committed within the geographic boundaries of the nation where the court is established. Today, our team of attorneys will be representing the case to you, to the people, specifically regarding the crime of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. We will be presenting legal arguments supported by statistics, journalistic reports, and first-hand testimonies from Palestinians directly harmed by the defendants, but who are not so full of despair that they cannot document to tell us what we must know and bear witness to. Then our judging panel, along with you, all of you, will deliberate as to whether or not the defendants are guilty, and will share the final verdict later this evening. With that, we will get started by presenting the grave case of genocide.
To all the people of conscience who are entering into the People's Court, we welcome you to your rightful place in history as the judges of what is right and wrong. I want to just give a quick to mark what has happened today. Today, people came from all across the country and joined us as observers from all across the world, as we did what the White House refuses to do. We said that we stand with humanity and that we are going to assert ourselves as the arbiters of justice, that we are the ones who draw the line between the right side and the wrong side. And we drew the line around the White House with over 100,000 people, all dressed in red. We drew the line around the White House, and we told Biden and the State Department and the Pentagon that they are on the wrong side. They are committing genocide. And the next step, the logical step that follows, is that we, the people, the arbiters of justice, the ones who decide right and wrong, would then try the criminals sitting in the White House for the crimes that they have committed. And so I want to just welcome you all to this People's Court, where the people are the judges and the ones who set the terms for the future.
The People's Court of Justice charges Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant with the crime of genocide. Yay! 8 months into Israel's relentless attack on Gaza, it could not be more apparent that the Zionist entity is enacting a genocide upon the Palestinian people. International law has condemned and prohibited genocide, as per the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. In the convention, genocide is defined as the following: any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Just by scrolling on our phones, we can see that Israel has committed nearly all of these charges upon hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. What we are witnessing is one of the most well-documented atrocities in history. And each hour, the evidence is only mounting against Israel and its allies. Today, we will only cover some of these charges, as Israel's crimes, frustratingly and infuriatingly too many to count in the time we have together today. As we walk through each element of Israel's genocidal attack, one can see that the charges are backed by data from international bodies, news outlets, organizations, and personal testimony, all painting a heart-wrenching and infuriating picture of what Israel has unleashed upon an entire population. But our charge does not stop there. In the same UN convention, the definitions that can be tried expand beyond the literal act of committing a genocide. The crimes that can be tried are genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, complicity in genocide. Who have we known to be complicit in genocide? Israel's best ally and friend, the United States. With each charge we foist upon Israel, we know that the U.S., the biggest financial and political sponsor of the apartheid state, is just as accountable for this genocide. The unanimously adopted UN Convention on Genocide specifies in its very first article that all members confirm that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law, which they undertake to prevent and punish. Even under its own domestic law, the United States codified the punishment of genocide in 18 U.S.C. Section 1091. And President Obama reiterated that policy in Executive Order number 13729, that preventing mass atrocities and genocide is a core national security interest and a core moral responsibility of the United States. But from their unwavering support of Israel, it is clear that these commitments to them are nothing more than lies. Based on the actions of President Joe Biden, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the People's Court of Justice charges the United States with providing material support for and diplomatic cover of the crime of genocide. Although our charge today is largely focused on the atrocities committed by Israel after October 7th, we know nothing but genocide has been carried out by Israel since its birth. From its conception, Zionism has always openly been a settler colonial project. and Israel's existence is premised on creating an ethnic majority in a land occupied by people who have lived there for generations. And so, the ethnic cleansing and expelling of Palestinians from their ancestral homes and land has always been an essential part of their settler colonial project. In each of the International Criminal Court's charges under genocide, there are two shared elements that must be present. The first stipulates that the attacks in question must target persons belonging to a particular national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, and that the perpetrator intended to destroy in whole or in part that national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. The words of their own leaders are evidence of their racist and genocidal mission, explicitly detailing their intent to destroy. Within days of October 7th, top leaders like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed the need to defeat the bloodthirsty monsters who have risen against Israel to destroy us. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that Israel would impose a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. He also said that Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. If it doesn't take one day, it will take a week. It will take weeks or even months. We will reach all places. Their words are confessions for the genocidal crimes that followed. The past 8 months only further reveal and heighten their deadly aims. These statements have not only come from Israeli officials, but also from the United States, who has aided and abetted in these atrocities. Most recently, the United States State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said that Israel has the right to try and target those civilians. The United States' complicity and cooperation in committing these horrors is undeniable and deplorable. The second shared element is that the conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct, or was conduct that could itself affect such destruction. Or each charge must be placed within a pattern of behavior. From their words to the sheer scope of their actions over these 8 months, it is clear that Israel's attacks on Gaza have been systematic and consistent. As we watch Israel rain bombs down on hospitals, schools, camps, and other places of refuge, it is evidence that they are stifling life and stunting any chances of rebuilding it in Gaza. The effect is tantamount to genocide. And with the assistance of corporate media outlets and weapon manufacturers like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, the ones supplying the most significant political and financial support for this genocide are those in the White House.
We want to welcome more and more people into the People's Court of Justice. Thank you so much, everybody. Today, the people, over 75,000 people from around the country, drew the red line around Joe Biden and the White House. Today, we have shown not only that the people will draw the red line on the charges of genocide, but we will show them that we draw what morality is in this country. We decide what is right or wrong and what is criminal or not criminal. And so, in a long line of historical revolutionaries who have used the People's Court, who have used the architecture of international law to expose the hypocrisy and the crimes of imperialism, today we hold a People's Court of Justice. And we'll be welcoming you in periodically as more and more people join and witness as the people charge Western imperialism and Israel with the charge of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. Thank you so much.
The first charge under genocide is killing members of the group. This requires that the perpetrator killed one or more persons. Such persons belong to a particular national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The perpetrator intended to destroy in whole or in part that national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, and that the conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group or was conduct that could itself affect such destruction. A blood measure of the devastation of the Zionist entity's attack, we know the numbers to follow are likely underestimated due to the need for UN body count to be from identifiable bodies. Israel's brutal assault has rendered bodies unrecognizable or buried them under the rubble of the homes and institutions in which they've destroyed. While they claim to be precise in their attacks, the methods and weapons with which they carry out their genocide show a complete disregard for Palestinian life. Entire bloodlines have been wiped off the map, as well as hundreds of workers essential to sustaining life. There is no question that Israel has killed one or more persons. There is no question that their murdered civilians belong to a particular national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. They are all Palestinians. There is no question that Israel intended to destroy, in whole or in part, the Palestinian people. On Jerusalem Day, Israeli nationalists and settlers chanted death to Arabs. And according to a comprehensive database compiled by Law for Palestine, there have been approximately 500 statements made by Israeli government officials embodying the Israeli state's intention to commit genocide and incitement to genocide since October 7th of 2023. So it is quite clear who the occupier is targeting. There is no question that the conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against Palestinians. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, as of June 5th, 2024, the 243rd day of genocide, there have been a reported 36,586 murdered civilians, approximately 1.7 million displaced Palestinians, 1.1 million Palestinians projected to face catastrophic levels of food insecurity and a full electric blackout. 40% of reported murdered civilians are men, 20% are women, 32% are children, and 8% are elderly. As of June 7th of 2024, the Committee to Protect Journalists preliminary investigations showed that at least 108 Palestinian journalists and media workers have been killed, making it the deadliest period for journalists since CPJ began gathering data in 1992. Israeli occupation forces deliberately target health workers, and as of May 17th of 2024, the Associated Press reported that nearly 500 health workers have been murdered. As of May 15, 2024, at least 95 university professors have been killed. On January 17th of 2024, the Israeli occupation forces destroyed the last standing university in Gaza, Isra University. We know that death is not the only metric for genocide. Our second charge, causing serious bodily or mentally harm to members of the group, almost goes without explaining, as we see the devastation unleashed by Israel on Gaza every day. From maimed bodies to traumatized children, the conditions in Gaza are worse than we can imagine. For those who survive, the inhumane conditions and dangers imposed upon them by Israel are a nightmare in and of themselves. This charge requires that the perpetrator cause serious bodily or mentally harm to one or more persons. Such person or persons belonged to a particular national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The perpetrator intended to destroy in whole or in part that national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And the conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group, or was conduct that could itself effect such destruction. Men, women, and children are experiencing a number of traumas simultaneously. According to clinical psychologist Dr. Scarlett Wong, who recently returned from Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza are experiencing numerous mental traumas. The first trauma is that Palestinians are under bombardment and witnessing death firsthand, and witnessing family and loved ones being murdered. Men, women, and children are surrounded by bombings, destruction, and death with no escape. The second trauma is knowing the entire world is watching, but has not taken any effort to stop the violence around them. Palestinians are aware, the whole world knows, but no one is stopping the violence. Think back to the press conference organized and hosted by Palestinian children as they pled to the world in English to stop the onslaught of violence against them. This genocide is the most widely documented genocide due to the power of social media. But while social media has allowed for those outside of Gaza to witness the atrocities through our phones, it has also caused those in Gaza to witness the dystopian reality that the world is willingly turning a blind eye to the Palestinians' inescapable demise. Dr. Wong states that there are certain types of trauma therapy which require limbs. However, UNICEF reported in January of 2024 that on average 10 children a day are losing limbs. While this statistic is specific to children, the loss of limbs is not exclusive to children, as men and women of all ages have lost limbs due to the genocide. Without limbs, Palestinian men, women, and children are unable to comfort themselves through trauma therapy, only causing more mental anguish and devastation. Even before the latest onslaught, Palestinians in Gaza suffered severe trauma from prior attacks. 80% of Palestinian children experienced higher levels of emotional distress, demonstrating bedwetting, 79%, and reactive mutism, 59%, and engaging in self-harm, 59%, and suicidal thoughts, 55%. 8 months of relentless bombardment, displacement, and loss of life will necessarily have led to a further increase in those figures, particularly for those estimated tens of thousands of Palestinian children who have lost at least one parent, and those who are sole surviving members of their families. For the families who remain intact or partially intact, it's about doing everything you can so your child doesn't realize you've lost control. Aisha Osma Abu Ajwa, a displaced Gazan, provided her personal account of serious bodily injury and mental harm. Now we will hear her story.
This is a testimony from Halal Adel Al-Najmi. On Monday, December 11th, 2023, I was asleep in our crowded house in Al-Maghazi refugee camp in the middle of the Gaza Strip. We woke up for Fajr prayer, and suddenly our house was subjected to intense shelling. I lost consciousness, and hours later, I woke up to find myself in the hospital with serious injuries all over my body. My name is Halal Adel Al-Najmi. I am 13 years old. I am from Al-Maghazi refugee camp in the middle of the Gaza Strip. I lived a beautiful life before the start of the war. Since the first day of the war, our house has turned into a refuge for many displaced people who fled from the Israeli shelling that targeted all areas of the Gaza Strip. We lived together with the displaced people as one family, sharing with them everything we had. I hoped that the war would end without us being harmed, but the war has been ongoing for several months, and I cannot describe the pain caused to me by the Israeli occupation, which will haunt me for the rest of my life. While my family was praying, the occupation forces bombed our house. The force of the explosion threw me and my brother Karim, 20 years old, into the street behind our house. My brother Karim and I were the only ones to survive the bombing, and everyone else was martyred. I woke up after several hours to find myself in the hospital and immediately asked about my family. I was told that they were receiving treatment in the hospital in Rafah at the south of the Gaza Strip, while my brother Karim and I were receiving treatment at the Martyrs of Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah. I was informed that my brother Karim's injuries were all over his body. He had lost bone and flesh from his left foot. He is receiving treatment in a ward adjacent to mine. I requested to see my dear brother Karim to check on him, but when I saw him, I was greatly shocked. I couldn't recognize him due to the severity of his injuries. His injuries were extensive, resulting in burns and significant disfigurement all over his body. The bombing caused burns on his face. I was hesitant to hold him in his hand and greet him, but I was relieved that he was still alive. I stayed in the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital for 3 months receiving treatment. For a month and a half, I was in a wheelchair and unable to walk. I suffered deep wounds all over my body, and the doctors performed skin grafting on my hands. The bombing caused nerve damage in my left hand, and I underwent surgery every 3 days. I underwent about 16 surgeries in Al-Aqsa Hospital. After completing my treatment at Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital and after undergoing many surgeries, I was transferred to a hospital in Khan Yunis city for neurological, physical therapy for my legs. I couldn't walk for over 3 weeks. My brother Khalid is married and lives in an apartment outside of our house. He survived the bombing and death. I went to his house after the invasion of Khan Yunis, where I was suffering from all injuries all over my body. I cried a lot because of longing for my family, but I didn't know about their martyrdom yet. After the bombing intensified in Deir al-Balah, we decided to evacuate to Rafah. We rode a truck in the middle of the night amidst danger and heavy bombing, and we arrived in Rafah. We lived in tents in the Shabura area in Rafah for 13 days. During this time, I had a fever and my wounds caused me a lot of pain. I suffered from severe infections in my body, and I couldn't find any treatment or pain relief. After 13 days of living in tents, and due to my poor health condition, the people of Rafah hosted us in a small shop where dozens of families were staying. We stayed there for 2 weeks, and after the end of the occupations and invasions in the central camps, we went to my uncle's house in El-Maghazi camp. My uncle's house is adjacent to our house. It is basically uninhabitable from the damage of the bombing of our house. We all slept in one room there. I lived there for 12 days. After that, I moved with my brother to shelters. We faced difficulty in getting food, drink, cleaning materials, clothes, and everything else. I constantly asked about my father, mother, and siblings, and my relatives kept telling me that they were fine receiving treatment in Rafah. But I started feeling like they weren't telling me the truth, and my worry and fear for them increased every day. My relatives' looks towards me were strange. I felt like they were hiding something from me, but they insisted they were fine and receiving treatment. I was playing on my brother's wife's phone, and I opened the pictures on the phone. I found a picture with the names of my father and mother and the date of their martyrdom, December 11th, 2023. I was greatly shocked, and I couldn't believe what I saw. I cried a lot, but I didn't know anything still about my siblings. I thought the bombing led to the martyrdom of my father and mother, but after insisting upon my brother's wife, she finally told me that everyone in the house was martyred, and only my brother Karim and I survived. My father, Adel al-Najmi, 52 years old, my mother, Mona, 46 years old, were martyred, along with my brother Ayad, 29 years old, and his infant daughter Hur, 6 months old. My brother Jamal, 27 years old, my brother Muhammad, 21 years old, my sister Ala, 26 years old, and her son, the child, Jude Magdad, 7 years old, my sister's young husband. Amjad Mahar Makdad, 28 years old, was also martyred. Everyone in our house was martyred, and dozens of our neighbors were injured. My neighborhood was completely destroyed. We fled after the occupation forces invaded Al-Maghazi camp at the beginning of January 2024 to Dir al-Balah. Then we fled to Al-Nusayrat camp. Now we are living in a school shelter for displaced people run by UNRWA in Al-Nusayrat camp. I have never felt safe for a single moment inside the school. The occupation forces bombed the school several times, and dozens of displaced people were martyred and injured in the school bombings. My brother's wife was going to get some food when she was hit by the shrapnel from the occupation's rockets bombing the schoolyard. Doctors describe her injury as moderate. Our life in the shelter is difficult. Every day I have to go up and down the stairs many times, which is very difficult with my injuries. I need to travel with my brother Karim to receive treatment, which has caused me severe knee pain. We have to get water and food ourselves because everyone living with us in the school is facing similar difficult living conditions to what we've been through. I stayed in the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital for a month and a half. All the places inside the hospital were filled with beds for the injured. The number of injuries coming to the hospital daily was very high, far exceeding the hospital's capacity, but the occupation's crimes did not stop for a moment since the beginning of the war. I dream that the war will end soon and I can live with my brother again. I hope my brother can walk and move his hand again. We don't feel any aspect of the life we used to live, but we must continue after losing everything. I hope to travel with my brother to complete our treatment. My brother Karim currently cannot walk. My dream is for him to stand on his feet and continue his life better than before. I still need treatment. The stitches in my body hurt me, and my body temperature often rises to 40 degrees Celsius. I can't find painkillers or treatment for my injury. We don't have food or water. I miss my school. I am an excellent student, but I lost my academic certificates in the bombing of our house. I lost everything. I miss my classmates. I miss studying. I miss my life before the war. I miss coming back from school and finding my mother preparing food and eating together. But my mother was martyred. The occupation killed her and left me to continue my life without her. The war must end immediately. The occupation must be held accountable for all the crimes it has committed against us in Gaza during the genocide war it has been waging on the Strip for the 8th consecutive month. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming here today and participating in the People's Court. Not only those who are here in person, but we are also live streaming to thousands on the internet. We are here to hold war criminals and the imperialist entities accountable for their horrific and despicable crimes against the Palestinian people. We have seen the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice provide meager and performative displays of justice, but with no follow-through or actual accountability for those responsible for such atrocities. As you have just heard, we have plentiful evidence to prove their responsibility and complicity in the decimation of the Palestinian people. And here today, we will say enough is enough. That we the people decide where the red line is, not the courts, and not the war criminals, and not the war profiteers that profit and control the courts. Now we will continue our arguments. Thank you.
But while Israel seeks to maim and kill Palestinian lives, they take their goals even further. Another offense under the Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. The Zionist project seeks not only to devastate Palestinian lives, but also targets the infrastructure and persons essential to sustaining the possibility of life. That is why one of our demands has always been to lift the siege on Gaza, which has been under a blockade for 16 years, long before October 7th. The widespread destruction of Gaza over the past 8 months serves as evidence of their aim to destroy conditions of life, as well as stifle hopes of rebuilding. Elements of the charge include the perpetrator intended to destroy in whole or in part that national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The conditions of life were calculated to bring about the physical destruction of that group in whole or in part. The conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group, or was conduct that could itself effect such destruction. The attack was directed by the perpetrator, and the attack was targeting civilian lives. As discussed earlier, Israeli political leaders have made at least 500 different statements inciting genocide and violence since October 7th of 2023. Such incitements made by political leaders legitimize genocidal calls by framing the eradication of Palestinians in Palestine as a means for Jewish survival. On October 11, 2023, Israeli President Isaac Herzog said, "It is an entire nation out there that is responsible." Israeli Agricultural Minister Avi Dichter told Israeli Channel 12 that the war would be Gaza's Nakba. When describing the war, he stated, "Gaza Nakba 2023. That's how it'll end." Israeli Heritage Minister Amihai Eliyahu suggested that dropping a nuclear bomb on the Gaza Strip was one of the possibilities of the current genocide. The Gaza Strip is 25 miles long and 3.7 to 7.5 miles wide, with a population of over 2 million people. The Gaza Strip is twice the size of Washington, D.C., with a population 3 times the size of Washington, D.C. Israel is said to be dropping dumb, otherwise known as unguided bombs, on Gaza, as well as heavy bombs weighing up to 2,000 pounds, which have a predicted lethal radius of up to 360 meters, and are expected to cause severe injury and damage as far as 800 meters from the point of impact. This weaponry is being deployed in one of the most densely populated areas in the entire world, where approximately 1 in every 100 people has been killed. The goal is to make Gaza unlivable, which UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Martin Griffiths said of Gaza just 3 months into the genocide.
This is caring for 2 orphan children of Gaza. I live in El Zaytoun, a neighborhood in the southeast city of Gaza City. My name is Aisha Osama Abu Hajwa. I'm 30 years old. I used to live with my husband, Kamal Abu Zhour, and our 4 children in our home safely and peacefully. My husband's parents and his married siblings also lived with us in the same house.
We lived together as a happy Palestinian family, sharing everything between us. But during this war, all we shared was pain in an indescribable way. After the birth of my fourth son, my husband and I agreed to be content with the children that God had blessed us with, so we focused on raising our 4 children. The requirements of life are very demanding. We could barely provide for their needs to secure a decent life for them. But in this war, the crimes of the occupation added 2 orphan children for me to care for and nurture after the occupation killed their parents. I am now a mother to 6 children. During the last day of the temporary ceasefire at the end of November 2023, which released Israeli prisoners in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners, we lived on edge. We feared the return of the war. My husband's sister-in-law and my friend, Iman Salah Abu Zur, went to visit and check on her family 2 days after the truce ended. She expected the truce to be extended, so she took her children with her. Rayyan Ahmed Abu Zur, 7 years old, Abdurrahman, 3 years old, Adam, 4 years old, and Kanaan, 1.5 years old. My friend Iman was eager to see her mother, father, and siblings, as she hadn't seen them for over 50 days of the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip. Shortly after she arrived at her family's house on December 3rd, 2023, the Israeli forces bombed the entire residential block, killing Iman and her children Adam and Kanaan. Her children, Rayyan and Abdurrahman, were seriously injured. Rayyan and Abdurrahman stayed in the intensive care unit for several days. Rayyan was wounded with shrapnel all over his body and had third-degree burns on his right leg. The shrapnel is still lodged in his body. Abdurrahman, or Abud as we like to call him, was wounded with shrapnel in his head and remained in a coma for a week. The children's injuries were severe, and I prayed to God at all times for their safety, as they are the remaining children of their young father, Ahmed, who lost his wife and 2 of his kids. Rayyan and Abdurrahman stayed in the hospital for a while. Their wounds healed slightly. I took them to live in my house with my children. I love them, and my children love them. We used to live together in one house, each with our own apartment, but today, they are just like my own children. The 2 children, Rayyan and Abdurrahman, did not recover from the shock of losing their mother and siblings or the wounds that the occupation inflicted upon them. 3 months after the martyrdom of their mother and siblings, on February 20th, 2024, the occupation forces suddenly stormed the area of the Zaytun neighborhood, besieging us in our homes amidst heavy gunfire. We couldn't leave our homes due to the intensity of the Israeli shelling. The bombardment and gunfire were indiscriminate and intense in our area. Quadcopter aircrafts fired at anyone who moved or tried to leave the area. The occupation forces advanced, blew up the doors of houses, and stormed the homes brutally. I tried to calm the 6 children, but all my attempts failed due to the severity of the violent shelling and relentless gunfire. The sounds of explosions drowned out all my attempts to calm them. My husband, Kamel Abu Zur, and several young men, including his brother Ahmed, the father of the 2 children, were arrested and taken to an unknown location. We remained in the house waiting for our turn to be killed or arrested. The shock to the orphan children, Rayyan and Abdurrahman, was immense. The occupation arrested their father, Ahmed Ayyash Abu Zur, in front of their eyes and took them all to an unknown location. We were afraid for their fate, screaming for them not to be killed. We didn't know anything that would happen to them. Later, I learned of their father's martyrdom during this arrest. The occupation forces stormed our house and asked us to leave. They allowed me to go out, but they prevented me from taking a bottle of water for the children. I wanted to grab my small child's bag with supplies and diapers, but they stopped me from taking it. I walked out of the house amidst soldiers and tanks, holding on to the 6 children, not knowing where to escape with them. The occupation forces asked me to walk on Salah ad-Din Street towards the central and southern areas of the Gaza Strip. We left our house after being besieged by the occupation forces for several hours. I walked with the 6 children on foot among the tanks, occupation vehicles, and soldiers, with the relentless shelling continuing for over 15 kilometers. We had no food or water, and fear gripped the children's hearts in an indescribable manner. I screamed and cried, begging the soldiers to stop firing, but the shelling intensified. I walked with difficulty due to extreme fear. The children witnessed dozens of martyrs' bodies strewn on the ground, crying intensely while blood covered the streets. The children cried a lot and asked for water, but I had nothing with me. We walked beside one of the tanks, which was moving quickly. The child, Abdurrahman, fell into a pit by the road, just 1 meter away from the tank. I screamed at the soldiers and raised my hands for them to stop. They pulled the child out of the pit, and we continued our journey of death among the merciless occupation's armored vehicles. I walked with the 6 children from the Zaytun neighborhood to the Nusayrat refugee camp, a distance of about 15 kilometers. I carried the 6 children, including my youngest, 7-month-old, and the eldest, Rayyan, who is 7 years old. The weather was extremely cold. When I reached the entrance of the Nusayrat camp, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Where am I?" People told me that I was in the Nusayrat camp. We drank salty water, and I fed the children bread and lentils provided by the people of Nusayrat. We survived death that night, but Rayyan and Abdurrahman lost their father, a martyr. I sat on the street in the Nusayrat refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, waiting for my husband Kamil and his brother Ahmed, the father of the 2 children. Then, the people of Nusayrat offered me and my family a place to stay in a small shop. Later, I learned that my husband had arrived at a shelter school belonging to UNRWA in the middle of the camp. When my husband arrived at the shelter school, he was only wearing underwear and was barefoot. They had been arrested by the occupation forces for several hours, stripped of all their clothes and interrogated. Then they were thrown onto the street. The 6 children and I headed to the shelter school and reunited with my husband on February 21st, 2024. We arrived at the shelter center without clothes, shoes, food, or water. We had no shelter. We lost everything. I sat in the school looking for a place to sleep until I found a space in one of the classrooms. We slept on tiles for a month and a half with just a blanket and mattresses to sleep on. The living, health, and environmental conditions in the shelter center were extremely difficult. My husband told me that the occupation forces killed his brother Ahmed, the father of the 2 children, Rayyan and Abdurrahman, in front of his eyes. The occupation forces interrogated them and then released them. As they were leaving the area of the occupation vehicles, the occupation forces fired directly at them. Ahmed was shot in the foot and in the abdomen. He was martyred on Salah ad-Din Street in the passage that the occupation claimed was safe. My husband tried to retrieve his body, but they fired at him. Ahmed's body remained lying on the ground among the occupation vehicles until stray dogs devoured it. I have been living for 3 months in a shelter for school for displaced persons in the Nusayrat camp in the middle of the Gaza Strip. I live on 3 small mattresses with my 6 children. They are my sons Murad, 6 years old, Karam, 5 years old, Anas, 4 years old, Adi, 7 months old, and the orphan children, Rayyan, 7 years old, and Abdurrahman, 3 years old. Rayyan and Abdurrahman are still suffering from their injuries sustained in the shelling that killed their mother and siblings. Shrapnel is still lodged in Rayyan's head, along with burns on his right foot and shrapnel in his face. The shrapnel has not been removed from his body due to poor health conditions and the continuation of the war on the Gaza Strip. Abdurrahman also suffers from a skull fracture, fluid in the testicles, constantly high blood pressure, and pain all over his body. All of my children suffer from difficulty sleeping and involuntary urination while sleeping due to the intense fear that still haunts them to this day. Abdurrahman suffers from severe psychological trauma and has emotional breakdowns when he hears his mother's name. The 2 children have become orphans with no support. They have no one in this life except me. The occupation deprived them of their mother's affection and their father's care. The occupation forced them to continue their lives while injured without any support. Now I am the mother of 6 children. The war has forced us all to live in shelter centers. I hope the war ends soon and we return to our home. We don't know if the house was destroyed or damaged, but we just want the war to stop and to return to our lives before the war. Thank you.
The
civilian infrastructure for life has been destroyed in many parts of Gaza. As mentioned above, over 1 million are displaced and without homes. There is no electricity in Gaza. The 3 major desalination plants were destroyed or left without fuel, severely limiting access to drinking water. Recent reports of Israeli plans to flood tunnels in Gaza with seawater is of major concern, given the risks it would pose of further degradation and collapse of Gaza's water and sewage infrastructure, and of long-lasting contamination of Gaza's aquifer and soil. Environmental experts have warned that the strategy risks causing an ecological catastrophe, leaving Gaza with no drinkable water, devastating what little agriculture is possible, and ruin the conditions of life of everyone in Gaza. The United Nations Special Rapporteur for the right to water is reported to have compared the plan to the mythical Roman salting of the fields of Carthage to prevent crop growth and render the territory uninhabitable. Additionally, 84% of all health facilities in Gaza are damaged or fully destroyed. More than 80% of Gaza's schools have been severely damaged, with every single university having been destroyed throughout the genocide. Bakeries, which are crucial to averting famine, have been deliberately targeted by Israel to ensure those who survive airstrikes will starve to death. Israeli bulldozers have razed fields and orchards to clear a buffer zone of more than 300 meters deep along the northern border between Israel and the Gaza Strip. A total of 40% of farmland has been completely destroyed, and 2,000 agricultural buildings have also been razed in Gaza, including 90% of all greenhouses in the northern districts. By targeting agricultural fields, Israel is attacking an important part of the Gazan economy and ecosystems. We will now hear testimony regarding the targeting of healthcare facilities and the prevention of birth.
On November 18th, 2023, a Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF evacuation convoy came under fire in Gaza City in what immediately appeared to be a deliberate attack against clearly identified MSF vehicles. 2 people were killed, both family members of MSF staff, including one who was a volunteer supporting MSF medical teams at Al-Shifa Hospital. This excerpt was taken from a Human Rights Watch article, testimony from a Doctors Without Borders staff member. When we arrived at Al-Wahida Street, I saw tanks and snipers at the top of buildings. I was terrified when I saw that the snipers and the tanks were pointing their weapons at us, especially at the 4th and the 5th van in the convoy. They started opening fire at us, and when a bullet grazed my forehead, I got a superficial injury. The bullet hit my colleague, Ala, in the head. He sat next to me. He had a critical head injury and started bleeding massively. His head fell on the steering wheel, and I immediately retook control of the vehicle to move to the right of the street. This testimony is from Pascal, an emergency coordinator for MSF who has been in Gaza since December 10th, 2023. This week, I sat down with some of our patients at Al-Emirati Hospital in Rafah, where people receive postpartum care. In addition to the exhaustion of childbirth, they must contend with the constant stress of bombings, displacement, poor living conditions in Rafah, and the uncertainty of what tomorrow holds. 3 of these women's stories particularly struck me. Meha is from northern Gaza. She went to a hospital when she felt her labor was starting, that she couldn't be treated. All the delivery rooms were full. She knew something wasn't right, that she needed to be admitted. She has had a cesarean section before. But with no other option, she had to go back to her tent. Her newborn son died. She gave birth to him in the latrines closest to her tent. When I re-entered our facility, Meha was sitting on her bed after receiving postpartum care. She's the one who called me to talk to her. She needed to express her deep pain to all of us. She needed to cry out to us about the injustice she experienced. Without this war, she would not have lost her son. Thank you.
A joint study by the UN, the World Bank, and the European Union estimates the damage to agriculture to be at $629 million. According to the same study, it would cost approximately $50 billion to rebuild Gaza. According to the researchers, even under optimistic scenarios for the pace of physical reconstruction, the scale of destruction in Gaza has been such that, simply from the narrow perspective of moving and building materials, it would still take until 2040 and probably longer to restore the housing units destroyed since the start of the war. We will now hear firsthand accounts of the destruction of families and forced starvation.
HK is a Palestinian from Gaza based in Chicago. My mother, Feryal Izz-el-Din Ad-Dajjani Khayal, was born in 1939 on November 10, 2023. She was killed by Israeli shelling in Gaza. She was with her daughter, my sister, Soha, and grandkids and great-grandkids sheltering in a family house. The house was bombed that night and became uninhabitable. They waited for the morning to move to another house, but an Israeli tank shelled them while walking and killed my 84-year-old mother, my 31-year-old niece, and my sister and daughters-in-law, who was 28 years old, a mother of 2 babies. My mother was very loving, compassionate, endearing, kind, and protective. She was strong, extraordinary, supportive, intuitive, caring, and mindful. I have received a lot of words of support, sympathy, and condolences from many family members, friends, neighbors, and people who worked with her in the past. They shared memories of her. Lamia, Feryal's sister, passed away in March 2023. My sister, Soha, tried to save my mother, but an Israeli sniper targeted her and shot her 3 times in the leg. Soha's daughter, my niece, had a disability. She was also targeted by the sniper. She was shot and bled to death for 7 hours. My injured sister and her family have been seeking shelter in a building and have been unable to go to the hospital since November 10th, 2023. No one has been able to send help for almost a week now. They are slowly running out of resources, including food, milk, and medicine. My sister Soha is kind, strong, loyal, determined, and dedicated. She has always taken care of her family, her husband, daughter, and 2 married sons with their families. Tariq, Soha's oldest son, lost his wife to Israeli shelling during this war. He has 2 kids. 12 years ago, her husband suffered a disabling stroke that left him completely dependent on her for all his daily functions. She feeds him and takes care of his personal hygiene and other needs. Despite all the hardships she has suffered, she still has a great sense of humor. My hope now is for the suffering of innocent civilians in Gaza to end, for the genocide to end, for the ethnic cleansing to end, for immediate ceasefire, for humanitarian aid to enter, and for the criminals to be punished for what they have done to us. Another testimony from a Gazan. Life has not only become difficult, but has become 5 times harder. We can't find flour because the Israeli army blocked it. We are forced to eat animal food just to survive. Sometimes we eat bird food, donkey food, and sometimes grass, which we pick from the corners of the streets. We are trying to survive hunger. I go 3 days without food, and my wife keeps asking me, "What did you eat today?" I reply that I'm not hungry. I come home empty-handed with no food, barley, any flour, no bread, no rice. Today, 1 kilogram of rice costs $33, so I can't afford to feed the children. We don't have any clean water. There's no drinkable water. We don't have electricity, and we cannot get medicines. My mother suffers from high blood pressure and diabetes. and I cannot get medication for her. A lot of people in Gaza are suffering from respiratory problems because of the smoke and dust from the bombings. Communicable diseases are also spreading quickly.
These are just a few of the crimes under genocide that Israel has committed in pursuit of its subjugation of the Palestinian people. Their actions show that they will not rest at the death of thousands of Gazans. They are after the destruction of Palestinian life. But again, just as we expose the Zionist project of Israel for its genocidal aims, we also point to the United States' equal responsibility for its complicity in the death and destruction in Gaza. Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign assistance since World War II, acting as the biggest provider of military assistance to Israel by a large margin. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has stated that Israel could not refuse the United States because they rely on them for planes and military equipment. The United States has had the ability to stop this genocide by stopping military and financial aid to Israel. And yet it turns a conveniently blind eye, refuting on-the-ground data. Their own knowledge of this genocide can be shown by looking at the previous red lines Biden has drawn. Knowing an attack on Rafah would surmount to an assault on thousands of innocent civilians, Biden called it a red line. But after Israel launched a massive ground and air attack on Rafah, the United States ignored its own stated policy and actively supported this invasion through the continued transfer of weaponry to the Israeli military. That is why we have gathered here today and show that our cause is right and just on all fronts. To draw our own red line. And also to mount our own legal charges against Israel for committing genocide and the United States for aiding and abetting it. Both crimes under international law.
Thank you. We want to welcome everybody again to the People's Court of Justice. If you're arriving now or if you're standing along the sidewalk, we welcome you to join in the audience, to join inside the People's Red Line so that we may hold these war criminals accountable. This morning, the people of this country, the people of conscience, have come together to draw the line of people's morality, people's justice, people's righteousness. And so we are here today to acknowledge that while international humanitarian law exists, it is not wielded by these bourgeois institutions for the people. And so today, the people use these tools to levy charges against the Israeli entity and the United States and Western imperialism. And we are here to say that the people charge genocide. So please join us. I know that it's hot, but it's only getting cooler. So please join us to hear more testimony as evidence of the war crimes that have been committed for the past 8 months and for the past 75 years.
Today, in addition to the crime of genocide, we will try the state of Israel and the United States for their numerous war crimes in Palestine. In our current global order and international legal infrastructure, war crimes are officially violations of international humanitarian law that take place in the context of an armed conflict. In the People's Court, though, while we see international law as an important front for solidarity and accountability, we also understand its limitations. In our search for true justice, we cannot simply set forth the charges of war crimes without first defining the political character of the Palestinian struggle. Rather than simply adopt the armed conflict framework used in the statutes, we must fully contextualize the power dynamics and the legitimacy or the illegitimacy of the parties involved. Israel is not a nation defending itself against a domestic terrorist group. It is an invading and occupying power. The Palestinian people are an occupied and oppressed people entitled to the exercise of their full sovereignty. This is not an armed conflict. This is an armed resistance movement fighting for national liberation. There are not two equal sides. Israel has the full financial and military backing of the imperialist powers. The Palestinian people have been under fierce occupation and siege for more than 75 years. It is with this in mind that we foist the charge of war crimes to underscore the atrocities Israel has committed, while we also understand the true stakes of the resistance movement in Palestine. Since the beginning of the 20th century, shortly after it was established, Israel has had the consistent support of one colonizing and imperialist power after another. After Israel proved its ability and willingness to operate as a proxy of Western interests in the region, the United States invested in its development in order to advance its own dominance in the region, ultimately becoming the primary military and financial sponsor of Israel. As we all know, the United States provides billions of dollars in military aid to Israel every year. It encourages and facilitates a number of private business and cultural exchanges between the United States citizens and Israel, including the police. U.S. bombs are dropped on Palestinian schools. Without this historical context, without a clear understanding of the material reality of the Zionist occupation and the Palestinian resistance, any legal framework that considers the two sides as equal is wholly inadequate to achieving a people's justice. Modern international human rights law further constrains the pursuit of such justice. Most war crimes consider only the attacking and killing of civilians as well as the destruction of necessary conditions for life. However, at the People's Court, we do not distinguish between crimes committed against armed resistance fighters and those who are traditionally considered non-combatants. Hamas did not arise from a vacuum, nor does it carry out the resistance through its own individual members. Founded in 1987, long after the Nakba of 48, when over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their land by the terrorism committed by Zionist settlers, killing 15,000 Palestinian people. Everyday Palestinian people contribute to the resistance in their organizing medical treatment, in their food distribution, in their reporting and journaling, in protecting their loved ones, in preserving Palestinian culture and identity. And the resistance has been ongoing since Israel's inception, carried on through generations of Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in the diaspora. Therefore, while we indict these war criminals for crimes against civilians and children and women, the People's Court recognizes all Palestinian life as worthy of justice. Finally, before addressing the charges for the attack and killing of medical personnel, journalists, protected objects, the use of white phosphorus, we must recognize how these crimes serve the function of the Israeli political project. Not only does international law protect medical personnel and facilities, press and journalists, as well as historical monuments and buildings dedicated to religion, education, science, the People's Court recognizes that these entities serve the Palestinian resistance and help preserve the existence of Palestinian life, history, and culture. And they're being destroyed. International law protects hospitals and other medical facilities because their absence makes an area unsafe, uninhabitable, forces populations to flee. Without medical personnel and facilities, the Palestinian people cannot treat wounds from Israeli airstrikes. It was noted earlier and recently reported, Gaza now has the largest population of child amputees in the world. We look also to the future, to rebuilding Gaza. We heard just now some numbers about what it would take, even if everything stopped now, to rebuild the thousands of buildings, of schools, of mosques, of churches, hospitals that have been destroyed. This makes it difficult or impossible, this destruction, to give birth to the next generation of Palestinians, which is precisely the point. They cannot heal from preventable illnesses brought about by the destruction of infrastructure or the denied access to water and food. They cannot report because journalists are being targeted. Journalists are being forced out, murdered, preventing the documenting of these actions by the military occupier. It prevents the truth of the actions taken by the Israeli occupation forces from being recorded. Family members abroad are left in the dark about their status of loved ones in Gaza. The stories of over 2 million Palestinians there, over 40,000 murdered civilians, would never come to light without the reporting that we've seen. Today we'll offer a few examples of these crimes, but just a few, because there are too many to list here today, and the multiplicity of methods it uses to destroy Palestinian culture and the continuation of life. So first we'll talk about the attacking of protected objects prohibited under the Rome Statute, Article 8, Section 2b4. To prove that a party is guilty of this war crime, we must show that the perpetrator directed an attack, that the object of the attack was one or more buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, or charitable purposes, or it's a historic monument, hospital, or a place where the sick or wounded are collected, which were not military objectives. 3, that the perpetrator intended such buildings dedicated to those purposes to be the object of the attack. Evidence that Israel is guilty of this crime has been shown across the globe in newspapers, Twitter feeds, anywhere else information is shared since October and before. They have intentionally bombed schools, also committing the war crime of scholasticide. They have bombed mosques and churches. They have bombed museums. They are attempting to destroy not just the Palestinian people in Gaza, but their culture and any chance they have at rebuilding. Just yesterday, it was reported that Israel, using a U.S.-made bomb, conducted a deadly airstrike on a UN school compound in Gaza, killing at least 32 people, including 7 children. This was the same type of bomb used last month in an airstrike that killed dozens of displaced civilians at a tent camp in Rafah, which Netanyahu called a tragic mishap. As for schools, Israel has destroyed or damaged more than 80% of them. And these are numbers from April. Surely that number is higher now. More than 5,400 students, 261 teachers, 95 university professors have been killed in Gaza. Nearly 8,000 students and nearly 800 teachers have been injured, with the numbers growing every day. At least 60% of educational facilities, including 13 public libraries, have been damaged or destroyed. At least 625,000 students now have no access to this form of education. Another 195 heritage sites, 227 mosques, and 3 churches have been damaged or destroyed, including the Central Archives of Gaza, containing 150 years of history. Isra University, the last remaining university in Gaza, was demolished by the Israeli military back in January. Without safe schools, there are additional risks that attend to women and girls, including gender-based violence. More than 1 million Palestinian children in Gaza now are in need of mental health and psychosocial support and will suffer the trauma of this war throughout their lives. I could go on, but again, today we're focusing on a small subset of the vast body of evidence supporting just this charge, and only a small subset of the charges that could be brought and should be against Israel and against the United States. We'll hear now testimony regarding the targeting of healthcare facilities and the prevention of birth.
This testimony is from a physician in Gaza from December 2023. We are displaced south from the valley, which is supposed to be a safe area, but every night, every day, there are airstrikes. They are targeting everybody. No one is safe. There are a lot of different types of injuries. We saw burns from different kinds of sources. We saw raw areas of flesh. We saw fractures. Also, there are a lot of kids with amputations. We have only the primary medical supplies with paracetamol, ibuprofen, and dressings. And unfortunately, we don't have access to our clinic. The Israeli army cut our access to the road. We treated a 6-year-old female child. She was badly injured with an external fixator, a tool to hold broken bones in place, and there is a big raw area in her flesh. She was crying, shouting. She was begging for painkillers, for sedation, because she's tired from the pain, and she's tired from the inability to move her arm. In most shelters, you will find fleas. You will find all kinds of skin diseases, all kinds of gastrointestinal symptoms. And in one shelter near where I'm located, there is hepatitis A spread between people. It's really hard to treat them because we don't have access to the needed drugs. We don't have access to anything at all. Water and food are not clean, and people are now eating anything they could find because it's really starvation here. I don't believe that anything I say will change the picture. My only message is that Palestinians have the right to be treated as human beings, have the right to live every day, every night. I fear for my kids' life, for my life. And I'm sorry to say that, but after 60 days of war, I'm losing hope. And I am saying that the ones who passed away in the first few days were very lucky. They didn't witness 2 months of terrifying days and nights. I'm seeing my people suffer, and I cannot do anything. This world is not fair. I'd now like to read to you a letter from Gaza, dated October 18th, 2023. My friend, when I read your letter asking me to write a word about Gaza, I usually answer you immediately. This time, I was silent for days. The words escaped me. Why? Maybe because of the horror of what we are living. Because early this morning, my family and I miraculously survived due to a crazy missile that destroyed our neighbor's house and threw all the rubble onto our house. Or maybe because I feel that the pictures I see are more eloquent than all the words. Or because I am no longer very convinced of the usefulness of talking, especially since we are talking about the justice of our cause. In the midst of the daily killing, siege, starvation, and state terrorism, which we have been subjected to for over 75 years with no answer. My friend, yesterday the Israeli occupation forces bombed the Baptist hospital in Gaza, and so far more than 500 people have been martyred. They were cut into pieces and became a pile of meat. As playwrights, we know that one of the cruelest theatrical tragedies is the play Antigone, in which King Creon refuses to bury Antigone's brother, and from here the dialogue between them revolves about what it means to be human, what is dignity, value, and rights, even after death. Antigone sees the body of her brother in front of her and could not bear leaving him unburied. Whilst the bodies that we see after the Baptist Hospital massacre, without heads, hands, or feet, are the new tragedy of our era. An old woman at the rubble of the hospital addressed a nurse, asking him, "Son, give me that hand lying there. I recognized it from the ring. It is my daughter's hand that I leaned on in the morning when she helped me sit on the chair to watch the news. That hand that turned on the TV for me. She greeted me and kissed my hand before leaving. That hand that always embraced me and patted my shoulder. That hand that combed my hair and always cut my nails. That hand, my son, was the source of all my strength in my last days. Let me give her my last kiss so that it will spare me the need to have one more of my daughter's body." My friend, I do not know what to write more. If you consider this a word, so read it to your friends and give them my thanks and appreciation. Because I know that free people with big hearts, human attitudes, and principles have become very few these days. From Gaza to Laval, which I loved, and to Paris, which I adored, we will meet one day when I am free like the rest of the inhabitants of this earth. Signed, Ali Abu Yassin. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll talk now about the second set of war crimes that we charge today. The use of chemical weapons, including white phosphorus, prohibited by the Rome Statute, Article 8, Section 2B18, and by the UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. There's ample evidence that Israel has used white phosphorus against civilian populations in both Gaza and Lebanon since October 2023. There's also evidence they've done so in prior attacks on Gaza. On October 11th, there were widely circulated images of Israeli artillery firing white phosphorus over Gaza City Airport. According to Amnesty International, the Israeli army fired white phosphorus in military operations along Lebanon's southern border between October 10th and October 16th. One attack in Daira on October 16th must be investigated as a war crime because it was an indiscriminate attack that injured at least 9 civilians and damaged civilian objects. These white phosphorus attacks clearly contravene international law. They are war crimes. We'll hear now evidence through stories of those impacted by the relentless bombings and chemical attacks that I've just mentioned.
This is a testimony from Tamer Nijm on the 13th of December 2023. Where shall we go? We are tired. Our lives have turned upside down. Running, running. From the minute we woke up, we start to run. When the night befalls, it turns to fear and terror. We run during the day for a loaf of bread, a liter of water, and a bite to eat. We run from place to place. Perhaps we would be safe, but unfortunately there is no safe place in Gaza. Wherever we run, we are in danger and bombarded in every place and at every minute in time. When the night comes and we are all sitting next to each other, we hug each other and lie to one another to forget the fear in our hearts. We keep moving from room to room on the basis that this room is safer than the other one until we end up hiding under the staircase thinking it is the safest place. Do you see how our days are? Running, running, fear and terror. Every day the same, and anyone who can escape believes he is a survivor. Sadly, no one is a survivor. Every home has grief. Every memory once existed has been erased. I don't know what this is for, and where is this world from us? Are our lives that cheap, sir? Consider us, as you said, animals? Where are the animals' rights from what is happening to us? I don't know what tomorrow is hiding, but what I'm sure of is that we are dying, but each one is waiting for their turn. Until our turn comes, we must suffer and die 1,000,000 times. If this is the end of the story, then kill us all. We are basically dead. We have neither lived the past, nor the present, or the future. We have not tasted anything in life. It was all black amidst darkness, no taste or color. We always pay the bill. We know why. Because we are fragile. I will not forgive. God is mighty. Now the winter season started. Do you know what does that mean? We are living 30 people inside one tent. Unfortunately, every 2 people are on one mattress stuck next to each other, head to toe. When the night falls, the tent turns into a pool inside. May God not let it happen to any of you. We find ourselves in the middle of water, speechless. People start to cry, some people start to pray, and others try to fix the tent. What a miserable and sad situation. Do you know, we wake up from our sleep and walk in the streets like ghosts. Like a face that saw a snake. All people in Gaza are in a state of shock. We do not know what is really going on. What is going on? Are we having a dream or is this a candid camera? I hope it is a dream or even a nightmare, as long as we wake up and nothing has happened for real. If we are martyred, then I would not have been martyred in sacrifice for anything or for the sake of anyone. I died oppressed with many unachieved dreams. I died while I was still longing for life. Very quiet night. A very quiet night of war. Last night was very quiet. I think I slept for an hour. A little more or less. The sounds of drones, planes, and cannons did not stop for a moment. All of that was nothing when a missile, a barrel of powder weighing a ton, or 6 barrels fell at the same time, shaking the earth, raising and shaking as if the earth's crust was a child's balloon filled to the brim with air, about to explode and destroy the world. Moments in which you witness death 1,000 times, and after the explosion ends, you do not believe that you are still alive and that you have been endowed with new moments of life. And you continue to wait for the next explosion, the next death, perhaps after a minute or 2 at the most. It was a really quiet night, enough that before we went to sleep, we were able to dine on 2 cans of beans for 30 people, which was unusual. The dinner was a big party in honor of the beans, but what spoiled the party was the lack of bread. We all dined with 5 loaves of bread, and the truth was that I was the one who spoiled the dinner party because of my heart. Because before that, I was standing on the street, and a man with his 2 daughters came and asked me for bread, just bread to feed the 2 girls, who had not tasted bread for 3 days. In fact, at the beginning, I told them that I have no bread, but just one look from one of the 2 girls was enough to penetrate my heart like a balm of mercy. I told him to wait. I brought him 5 loaves of bread to share with him the bread I had. I will never forget, as long as I live, how his trembling hands picked up those loaves and how the 2 girls' eyes began to shine again, and he quickly went away thanking me. It was as if he was running away with his great spoils, which he did not want anyone to see with him. Sometimes the quiet gets boring, especially if a friend calls you in the middle of the night to reassure you that he is still alive. But his childhood friends Yusuf and Adnan and their families were martyred a short time ago. How much I love that Nadi Samar, Adnan's daughter, who is not more than 3 years old. Every time I went to visit them, she would run towards me and cling to my neck to take her gift with her black eyes, curly hair, and her great height, which was disproportionate to her age. We expected her to be a basketball champion. A really special night. I had barely hung up the phone and did not know how my tears had betrayed me. I only woke up to the sound of a large explosion followed by heavy rain that poured down on us on the roof, the zinc roof under which we were sleeping. It took moments until we realized that it was stones that had penetrated the zinc roof and scattered thousands of pieces from the building that was not far from our residence. A few meters before it became a large hole, of which only a few pillars remained, and a palm tree that had been planted in the house for decades. It remained miraculously steadfast, as it refused to die in order to remain a witness to what happened, but many of the dates that it was holding in its bosom fell. What a deadly calm. I heard the broadcaster on Al Jazeera saying that that night was the worst since the beginning of the war because the calm did not stop for a minute. My nerves almost shattered from the intensity of the calm. These shells and missiles were made to frighten us. You can't help but be afraid. But how can I write in the midst of all this terrifying calm? This is not consistent with the human soul because I could die at any moment and that would not be a disaster. I sat down to write as if nothing is happening around me. Yes, around me, because the ground keeps shaking and the smell of gunpowder fills my nostrils and smoke fills my mouth. Home from time to time, and the explosions do not stop. It seems that I have gone crazy. I think so, or I am dead. I will resist until the last letter and convey my voice to the world, the noisy world that I do not wish for it a quietness like ours. Enjoy your noise, and when you watch our news, turn your faces away from us or change the channel for fear that we disturb you. I wish you a good sleep. That last testimony was from Ali Abu Yasin on the 10th of October, 2023.
Remember that many of the weapons that are used to produce the heartbreaking testimonies that you're hearing today are given to the United States given to Israel by the United States. And there's plenty of evidence for that. For example, the weapons used in the Israeli attack on Thursday, June 6th, at the UN-run Al-Sardi school in central Gaza's Nuseirat refugee camp, which murdered at least 40 Palestinians, were U.S.-made weapons. They took a measurement unit from the missile, which was used to aid with precision targeting and manufactured by Honeywell, an American conglomerate that specializes in the design and delivery of sensors and guidance devices. Israel has historically used U.S.-made weapons, and the same part discovered after Thursday's attack was found after the Israeli bombing of a Palestinian home in Gaza in 2014. A January 2024 attack, which killed at least 95 civilians, including 42 children, and Rafah included evidence of a GBU-39 small-diameter bomb, a precision-guided weapon with a smaller warhead made in the U.S. by Boeing. And in all four attacks, there was no indication that the residential buildings hit could be considered legitimate military objectives or that people in the buildings were, quote, military targets, raising concerns that these strikes, like so many others, were direct attacks on civilians and civilian objects. They therefore must be investigated of and prosecuted as war crimes. We'll hear more testimony now, and then we'll wrap up this section and move on to the crimes against humanity. This testimony is about the toll of this relentless siege on Palestinians.
This testimony is titled, I Lost My Son, My Support in This Life. When God blessed me with my first son, Adey, I embraced him and wished for him a successful life. I hoped he would complete his education, that he would be able to get a job that would enable him to serve his community, his country, and his religion. My name is Fida Fathi Abu Yusuf. I am 40 years old. I live in Al-Nuseirat camp in the middle of the Gaza Strip. I graduated with a diploma in business administration from the Islamic University of Gaza in 2004. I got married nearly 20 years ago to Imad Al-Audat, and I gave birth to 4 children. Uday, 18 years old, Ragad, 17 years old, Muhammad, 16 years old, and Leen, 11 years old. We lived in a house in the Burej camp with my husband and children until I separated from him in 2018. Since my husband and I separated, I moved back into my father's house in Al Nusayrat camp. Here, I lived with my children in a small room which contained the kitchen, bathroom, and the room where the 5 of us slept. We had lived in this small apartment for over 4 years. I searched for a long time to find a job opportunity so I could improve the living conditions of my children, but I couldn't find any. There are no jobs in the Gaza Strip, and unemployment rates are very high. Several years ago, I thought of preparing and baking flatbread on fire, which my son Uday would sell in the market. I brought my idea to life and managed to form some customers, business owners who owned small restaurants. The work was little and intermittent, and its preparation was difficult and required a lot of time and effort. My children helped me, and we were happy because this was a job that we could provide ourselves with so we could improve our living conditions. On September 9th, 2023, I managed to rent an apartment close to my family's house. My son Uday started high school in September 2023, and I was determined to provide a suitable atmosphere for him to study. We were happy to live in our new apartment. Although we rented it and paid 450 Israeli shekels every month, we at least had our own kitchen, bathroom, and had 3 bedrooms. The Israeli war on the Gaza Strip began on October 7th, 2023, less than a month after we moved into the new apartment, which was located on the 4th floor. I feared for my children from the intense bombardment. The occupation forces bombed several houses adjacent to us, and dozens of our friends, neighbors, and loved ones were martyred. I was very afraid for my children, and we all began to sleep in one room. I used to tell them that if the house was bombed, we would die together, and if we survived, we would survive together. Our financial situation deteriorated greatly during the war. The war caused the closure of all restaurants, and all residents of the Gaza Strip lost their jobs due to the closure of crossings and the depletion of all food supplies from the markets. I lost my temporary job because of the closure of the restaurants. We couldn't even find flour to cook with. The days were extremely difficult. My son Uday searched for work in many areas, and on Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, he found an opportunity at one of the wood-fire bakeries in the Nusayrat camp. I asked him to take care of himself and stay away from places of bombing. He was my eldest son, my friend and companion. He cared for his siblings after I separated from their father. He was everything to us. Uday went to work with the sons of our neighbors. While Uday was transporting some bread on his bicycle, the occupation forces bombed several residential apartments in the Salah Towers south of the Nusayrat camp. Uday was riding his bike under the tower when the rubble of the bombing fell on his small body, and he was instantly martyred. Our neighbor's daughter told me that the occupation had bombed the Salah Towers area, which was very close to my son's new job. I rushed to the bombing site. It was about 800 meters from my house. I searched for Uday at the bombing site, but I couldn't find him. I meticulously searched everywhere, but I couldn't find him. I hurried to Al-Auda hospital in the Nusayrat camp and started searching among the injured for my son Uday, but I couldn't find him. I searched among the martyrs' bodies, examining their faces closely, but I didn't find Uday. My fear increased and my tears kept falling. I wanted my son. Where is my son Uday? People told me that some of the injured and martyrs were transferred to the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Dir al-Balah. I quickly went to the hospital and started searching among the injured for Uday. I still had hope that Uday was alive, but I couldn't find him. I shouted Uday's name many, many times in the hospital courtyard and departments, but no one answered me. I asked one of the doctors about the location of the martyrs, and he directed me to the martyrs' tent, and I went there immediately. Accompanying me in the search for my son Uday was my son Muhammad, my brother Jihad, my brother Ahmed, and one of our neighbors. We all searched in the martyrs' tent. The number of martyrs was large, but I managed to find my son Uday's body. I couldn't believe that my son had been martyred and that I had lost him. I hugged Uday. I held his face and his body. I found him injured with shrapnel behind his ear, shrapnel in his chin, and shrapnel which caused his right eye to be gouged out. Uday was martyred while he was at work to provide us with some food. We couldn't find ambulances to transport Uday's body to the cemetery as the ambulances were busy transporting martyrs and casualties to the hospital. We placed Uday in a car. I held him in my arms, and throughout the journey, I held him and kissed his face. We quickly reached home. I wished for the journey to be much longer so that I could continue holding my son. My mother, father, siblings, neighbors, and friends bid farewell to my son Uday. We prayed for him in front of the cemetery, and I buried him with my own hands in the cemetery of the Nusayrat camp adjacent to the great Nusayrat mosque. This was the worst moment of my life, and these days are the worst days of my life. I lost my life with the martyrdom of Uday. 2 days before Uday's martyrdom, he sat with me and told me that he wished to be a martyr in this war while defending his land, Palestine. He told his friends that he wished to be a martyr. Shortly before the bombing, Uday told his colleagues at work, Qusay Yassin and Muhammad Al-Hum, that he dreamt of martyrdom. He asked them, if a rocket falls on us and we are martyred, will God forgive us? Moments later, the rocket fell on them and Uday was martyred. And Muhammad Al-Hum was slightly injured while Uday's friend, Qusay Yassin, suffered a skull fracture and spent a whole week in the intensive care unit. He is still receiving treatment until this day. Since my husband and I separated, I have been supporting my 4 children alone. I worked hard to provide a living for them. My goals and dreams were to provide a decent life for them, but the war ruined everything. I tried to open a small stall in one of the shelters, but I couldn't because it required a large capital, which I didn't have. My martyr son Uday dreamed of achieving a high score in the high school diploma, attending university, and after graduation, securing a job to provide a decent life for me and his siblings. But the occupation killed him, killed his dream, and placed pain in our hearts that will never fade. Uday excelled in his studies during elementary and preparatory school, but his grades slightly declined after I separated from his father. However, I enrolled him in private lessons for Arabic, mathematics, and English. I endured additional expenses because I wanted a better future for Uday than what I had. I wanted Uday to achieve a high score on the high school diploma and to receive a scholarship. But in this war, he earned the honor of martyrdom, standing firm on our land of Palestine. Everyone who knew Uday cried for him. The mathematics teacher, Firas Eid, came to us and told us that he loved Uday very much and that Uday was a polite, respectful, and hardworking student. Uday wanted to have a better future, to get me and his siblings out of our difficult living conditions. His teacher cried a lot for Uday and asked me to take care of my other children so that they could continue Uday's journey. After the Israeli forces stormed the central Gaza Strip camps in January 2024, including the Nusayrat camp, I fled with my children to tents in the city of Rafah, south of the Gaza Strip. My apartment, before the evacuation, turned into a shelter for many of my relatives whose homes and adjacent houses were bombed by the occupation. Suddenly in this war, me and my children became displaced. We lived in the displaced people's tents in Rafah city for a whole month, enduring severe suffering. The weather was extremely cold at night, and the sun's scorching heat was unbearable during the day. We suffered a lot from the rainwater. We couldn't find food, water, or clothes. After a month, we returned to my apartment after the occupation withdrew. That month was full of suffering. Before Uday's martyrdom and after hosting displaced people in my house, I hid Uday's school books so that the children wouldn't damage them. It's been 6 months since Uday's martyrdom. To this day, I put out a spoon and a glass for Uday after preparing food. His body may have departed, but his spirit lives among us. Uday's relationship with his siblings was like that of a young father to his children. He was affectionate towards them, gave them from his allowance, and bought them many things. He dreamed of providing us with a decent life. Today, my dream is to continue Uday's journey, to be able to provide a decent life for my children, to educate them, provide a permanent home for them, and to secure a stable job for myself. I hope that this war will end soon. We are exhausted by the daily continuous killings. Thank you.
So as we conclude the presentation on war crimes before moving to the final crime section, crimes against humanity, just note that we've mentioned only a couple, right, of the dozens that could apply. We presented only the tiniest amount of evidence, even for those charges that we are presenting today. Some of the other charges include, again, scholasticide, attacks on humanitarian aid and peace missions, rape and sexual violence, and on and on and on. No legal statute, no body of international law, not even any testimony could fully capture the horror of what's being perpetrated right now by Israel with the assistance of the United States. And it raises some questions. How will Palestinians rebuild after this phase of the resistance struggle when all universities have been destroyed, when all hospitals have been destroyed, when all places of worship have been bombed, when sites containing Palestinian art and historical documents, artifacts of cultural heritage have been razed to rubble? So while international human rights law provides us with a hook and a list of crimes, it doesn't accurately describe what's happening, which is an all-encompassing attempt to destroy Palestine, to destroy Palestinians, and to prevent Palestinian life from flourishing in the future. And we'll move now to the crimes against humanity. Thank you.
The People's Court of Justice charges Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant with the following crimes against humanity for orchestrating and ordering the widespread and systematic murder, extermination, forcible transfer, torture, apartheid, and other inhumane acts against the civilian population of Palestine before and after October 7th and Gaza over the last 8 months. For facilitating material support for these crimes and providing political and diplomatic cover, enabling their furtherance and escalation, the People's Court of Justice charges the United States, based on the actions of the U.S. President Joe Biden and U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, with violation of their obligations as officials representing a signatory state to the Geneva Convention to prevent and punish such crimes. Crimes against humanity include that of murder, extermination, forcible transfer, torture, apartheid, and other inhumane acts committed against any civilian population before or during the war, or persecutions on political, racial, or religious grounds in execution of or in connection with any crime within the jurisdiction of the People's Court, whether or not in violation of the domestic law of the country were perpetrated. Leaders and organizers at the helm of formulating or executing a common plan or conspiracy to commit any of the foregoing crimes are individually liable for criminal acts performed by any persons in execution of such plan. Crimes against humanity are among the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole, warranting and entailing individual criminal responsibility and requiring conduct which is impermissible under generally applicable international law, as recognized by the principal legal systems of the world. The first prosecutions of crimes against humanity occurred during the Nuremberg tribunals against Nazi leadership. From its first use, crimes against humanity have been prosecuted in tribunals on the Rwandan, Cambodian, and Yugoslavian genocides. Eventually, these crimes originating from law, arising from fundamental principles founded on indispensable norms, were codified by the 52nd UN General Assembly in Rome, establishing the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. The Rome Statute provides that crimes against humanity are those that do not require a nexus to an armed conflict, but are those committed in the context of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population pursuant to a state or organizational policy. The shared element of a crime against humanity is that perpetrators target civilian populations in widespread or systematic ways, subjecting civilians to the most egregious cruelty human beings can impose on one another. These crimes offend the core of our shared humanity, are not limited by borders, and are the responsibility of the entire international community to enforce. Though it is not required for the perpetrator to have knowledge of all characteristics of an attack or the precise detail, the indicted individuals being tried here have demonstrated essential contribution, intentional direction, and cognizable control over the most despicable and horrifying atrocities humanity is capable of inflicting on itself. Palestine has been subjected to widespread and systematic attacks for decades from Israel, enabled and funded by the U.S. The indicted individuals have used their offices with the intention of furthering these attacks. The awareness or intent required by an Article 7 crime has been shown by the expressions of genocidal plans, an intent already demonstrated to carry out crimes against humanity amounting to genocide. Each of the alleged crimes against humanity committed by the indicted individuals charged below require that acts be widespread or systematic and inflicted on a civilian population. The crimes perpetrated by the indicted individuals have been inflicted upon the entire population of Gaza, approximately 2.5 million people in an area the size of Las Vegas, significantly more tightly packed than New York City. The ICJ has established the widespread and systematic nature of Israel's attacks on the civilian population of Gaza and its multiple orders on the ongoing case brought by South Africa on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide in the Gaza Strip. The key elements establishing the execution of crimes against humanity have been established by overwhelming evidence in this tribunal, domestic U.S. courts, by the ICC prosecutor, and by Biden administration officials.
There you go.
This is the story of Hiba Dawood, Gaza, January 24th, 2024. The story is not over yet. Do you remember my sister who I said was taken out from under the rubble of her house and she fled to the south because it was safer, as they claimed? In the morning after the end of the truce, her husband's brother came to tell us the news of her martyrdom together with her husband and her children. The Israeli army bombed the residential building to which she was displaced, and only her eldest son, who was 10 years old, remained. He was injured by a shrapnel in his eye. It was shocking news for me. My sister, who is very dear to me, she is 2 years older than me. We used to do everything together. We even used to work together. My sister is a martyr. She deserves the title of a martyr. She was an angel on earth and loved by everyone. She would not harm an ant. The nightmare is not over yet. Tanks are approaching where we took refuge, and shelling is everywhere. We left where we had sought refuge and returned to western Gaza because it had become safe and the tanks had withdrawn from there. The area there is not suitable for habitation. There is no electricity or water, but we have no choice but to die. We went out under the bombing, and the bullets were surrounding us. My father was taking care of my injured husband and realized that his ear needed surgery because it was completely closed and had no opening for hearing. He needs a referral abroad to have his operation, but how to do that I not know. We are trying, but we cannot leave the north, as the occupation has completely separated it from the south. The war is not over yet. This week, tanks return to the west, near us, and this is what worries me. They enter homes, kill men, whether old or young, kill and leave. But now, there's no place to run to. We decided to stay where we are. We are running from death to death, and there's no safe place to go.
Don't be afraid to be loud.
Top Israeli officials have clearly espoused intent to systematically destroy civilian life in Gaza. The intent has been continuously carried out over the course of nearly 9 months. These officials, including the indicted individuals, have repeatedly equated Hamas with all Gazan civilians. The following quotes were cited by the ICJ in its January 26th order for provisional measures preventing the crime of genocide in the Gaza Strip. On 9th of October 2023, Mr. Yoav Gallant, Defense Minister of Israel, announced that he had ordered a complete siege of Gaza City and that there would be no electricity, no food, no fuel, and that everything was closed. On the following day, Minister Gallant stated, speaking to Israeli troops on the Gaza border, "I have released all restraints. You saw what we are fighting against. We are fighting human animals. This is the ISIS of Gaza. This is what we are fighting against. Gaza won't return to what it was before. There will be no Hamas. We will eliminate everything. If it doesn't take one day, it will take a week. It will take weeks or even months. We will reach all places." Deputy Knesset Speaker Nissim Vaturi from the ruling Likud party, of which Netanyahu is chair, wrote on X that Israelis had one common goal: erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. On the 13th of October 2023, Mr. Israel Katz, then Minister of Energy and Infrastructure of Israel, stated on X, "We will fight the terrorist organization Hamas and destroy it. All the civilian population in Gaza is ordered to leave immediately. We will win. They will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world." Despite these statements, the named U.S. officials have been unwavering in their total support of Israel's aims to eradicate Hamas. By facilitating the acts described throughout this indictment, Israeli leaders Netanyahu and Gallant have committed nearly every single one of the Article 7 crimes against humanity. With these key shared elements met, the People's Court brings the following charges: crime against humanity of murder under Article 7(1)(a), the crime against humanity of extermination under Article 7(1)(b), the crime against humanity of forcible transfer of population under Article 7(1)(d). Article 7(1)(f) and G1, crimes against humanity of torture and rape. The distinguishing element of torture is the infliction of severe physical or mental pain or suffering, not incidental or inherent to lawful sanctions upon one or more persons who are in the custody of or under the control of the perpetrator. A distinguishing element of rape is the invasion of a person's body by conduct resulting in penetration, however slightly, of any part of the body of the victim with any object or part of the body committed by force, threat, or coercion. Whistleblowers have revealed that policies originating from the indicted individuals have resulted in egregious harm to Palestinian detainees amounting to Article 7 torture. Wounded detainees were subjected to extreme physical restraint, strapped to their beds, wearing diapers, and fed through straws. One whistleblower said that the prisoners were stripped of anything that resembles human beings. Currently, over 9,000 Palestinians are being held, with many without an arrest warrant. Just this Thursday, reports from the notorious Sidi Timan military base document incidents of abducted Gazan civilians being sodomized with metal rods electrocuted, denied sleep, and mercilessly beaten with batons, rifle butts, and metal detectors until they fainted or died. Prior to October 7th, the countless cases of horrific abuse amounting to torture were imposed upon civilians and documented by Israeli human rights organizations. There are reports of rape and sodomy, among other forms of physical and psychological torture. A leaked draft of a UNRWA report detailed an interview that a 41-year-old detainee said interrogators made him sit on something like a hot metal stick and it felt like fire. And also said that another detainee died after they put the electric stick up his behind. Other detainees report being shocked in an electric chair numerous times. Yoel Donchin, a military doctor serving at the site, said it was unclear why Israeli soldiers captured many of the people he treated there. He said many detainees are unlikely to be combatants involved in the war. He stated that detainees included a paraplegic, a 300-pound man, and an individual who had breathed through a tube through his neck since childhood. Fadi Bakr, a law student from Gaza, was captured while he was caught in the middle of a firefight during an attempt to get flour for his family. He said IOF soldiers stripped him naked, confiscated his phone and savings, and beat him repeatedly while accusing him of being a militant. There have been harrowing images leaked from other Israeli concentration camps of detainees being zip-tied, blindfolded, and forced to sit in stress positions while soldiers verbally and physically abused them. Mass graves in Khan Yunis uncovered hundreds of bodies of men, women, and children who have been zip-tied, and some of whom were buried alive. The People's Court additionally charges the crime against humanity of apartheid under Article 7(1)J, the distinguishing element of which is the committing of inhumane acts, violating peremptory norms in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over another, over any other racial group or groups. The indicted individuals intended to maintain the regime of systematic oppression of Palestinians through its extreme restriction of every facet of Palestinian life prior to October 7th, and severely worsened in the aftermath. I offer to the court evidence of these extreme restrictions through the Abu Sultan family's experience.
As the Israeli war intensifies on the Gaza Strip, especially in the northern area and Gaza City, thousands of families were forced to flee from the north to the central and southern parts of Gaza. Among the families that fled was my son's wife's family. After they fled during the war, they lived with us in our house in El Nusayrat refugee camp in central Gaza. My family home is located in the midst of a cluster of UNRWA schools, which prompted many of our relatives who considered the area safe to seek refuge with us. We live south of the Gaza Valley, which the occupation classified as a safe area. However, in the afternoon on Saturday, February 17th, 2024, the occupation forces bombed my house with several missiles, resulting in the complete destruction of my house and the martyrdom of 10 of my family members, most of whom were women and children. At 58, I am now deprived of my family, and I am completing the remainder of my life with what's left of my family. I am a sick man suffering from blood cancer. I've been suffering from the disease for several years and have undergone intensive treatment sessions to control and limit its spread in my body. However, I lost my immunity and became susceptible to the simplest of diseases, which forced me to leave my job and refrained me from moving too much. I used to go from my home to the mosque and to visit my daughters and relatives. That was my life. I was married to my soulmate, Ahlam Muhammad Abu Sultan, in 1987. She is from the town Hamama, which was occupied in 1948. My marriage to her was a gift. We have 3 sons, Nabil, Muhammad, and Ahmed, and 6 daughters, Palestine, Fida, Reem, Nur al-Huda, Aya, and Mina. 4 of my daughters got married and 1 of my sons got married. God blessed me with 9 grandchildren from my daughters and my son Muhammad. I lived the most beautiful days with them, and my wife and I were happy with what we had achieved in our lives for our children, seeing them grow up, get married, and witnessing our grandchildren before our death. My wife was my biggest supporter through my illness and the crutch who I leaned on at all times. The occupation killed my 2 infant grandchildren. My middle son, Muhammad, got married on March 1st, 2023, and Muhammad's wife was 5 months pregnant when the war broke out, and she suffered greatly. She gave birth to my granddaughter, Juri, on January 27th, 2023. We couldn't celebrate her arrival due to the intensity of the war and Israeli bombardment. Juri is my first granddaughter from my sons. We had planned a big celebration for her arrival. Before the war, my wife and I agreed to buy a cake and invite our relatives and friends to the party. But the occupation ruined everything we planned and destroyed the joy of welcoming our granddaughter. My daughter, Reem, married and gave birth to a baby boy named Ahmed. They were happy with the birth of their first child. During the bombing, my daughter's husband, Ala, and their infant son, Ahmed, were killed, along with the wife of my son and their infant daughter, Juri. The occupation robbed us of our joy and deprived us of our loved ones. My marriage to Ahlam made me one of the happiest people. Our marriage was the beginning of a beautiful future, and with her, I managed to achieve my dreams. She was beautiful in every aspect, loved by everyone, and had a good relationship with everyone she knew. She never hurt anyone. She had a pure heart, and Israeli bombs deprived us of her company. I have no dreams left after the departure of my wife Ahlam. All I wish and dream is for the war to stop, for the Israeli forces to be held accountable for their crimes, for the world to be just to us and to restore our occupied land, and for the reconstruction of Gaza to be expedited so that we can live the remainder of our lives in dignified homes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Article 7, 1H and K, crime against humanity for persecution and of other inhumane acts. The distinguishing element of which is the infliction of great suffering or serious bodily injury to body or mental or physical health by means of an inhumane act similar in character to any other Article 7 crime. The indicted individuals have subjected the civilian population of Gaza to constant, indiscriminate bombardment. The war crime of weaponized starvation, deprivation of clean water, basic sanitation facilities, and health care, all while blocking readily available humanitarian aid. And now we will hear a story from Dir al-Balah of the relentless persecution faced by Gazans.
Since the bombings resumed, my every thought has been on planning our next forced displacement. The events that drove us from the north are now repeating here in the same manner. Our previous evacuation was marked by panic, which terrified the children, a mistake I can't make again. It was the most harrowing part of this war for me. My son Kareem, only 7, astoundingly asked for a separate emergency bag. His mature understanding of our situation is both heart-rending and awe-inspiring. Food supplies are dwindling. Today, Hassan, my husband, queued for 4 hours for gas, but to no avail. I'm stretched thin, caring for my elderly and sick parents and our children, while Hassan spends his days trying to provide for us and his family. The scarcity of aid has led to desperate struggles over water, tearing at the fragile social fabric we once had. I've heard of people nearly fighting to death over basic necessities, highlighting the inequality and chaos that have arisen. Amid all this, I yearn for care and support myself. Your calls are my only respite, the time when I can truly be myself. Never did I imagine living through such times. With each day, the bombings seem closer, and the air is heavy with panic and foreboding. I fear what lies ahead could be even worse. Is that even possible? We've hit a point of complete exhaustion. There's simply nothing to eat. Even if the war were to stop right now, it almost feels meaningless. Life itself seems meaningless. Just imagine 1.8 million displaced civilians crammed into the south, an area already densely populated. Our brains can't process it anymore. The dead bodies, the explosions, it's too much. Tensions are high. People can't tolerate each other. We've heard horrific reports from the north about people being buried alive and women and children being detained. We're like the walking dead, devoid of life. Aid is scarce, and by the time we get any, we're buying it ourselves. Daily, there are fights for food and water. Crimes has surged in the new chaotic environment. There's no police, no security. Usually there would be some order maintained during a war, but now there's only chaos, no law and order. It feels like we're caught in a complex, unfamiliar game. If they opened Rafah, everyone would flee instantly. There are no words left to describe our plight. Our only pastime has become looking at the stars when they're visible and queuing for aid. The constant buzz of the zanana, the drone, is unbearable. You don't understand. It eats at my bones. It's so loud, constantly interrupting sleep and conversation. It's like someone shouting over you all the time. Yet we find ways to cope. We joke, we sing. It's grim, and we know it might take years for people to return home, for hospitals and schools to function again. There's a sense of hope about returning home, but the path to recovery is daunting. We need to conserve energy for what comes next. You know how they say after party? Yeah, what comes next is the after party. Where I'm staying now, we have nothing. No food, no electricity, no water. The effort to find and break wood for fire just to eat something is backbreaking. Even basic needs like using the bathroom become a challenge without water. The relentless task of maintaining a fire is the most draining thing. I've been using garlic cloves to treat my fever and flu because medicine is nowhere to be found. Yes, I still hold on to hope. This war has progressed through many phases, and now we're in this brutal stage of survival. In the beginning, when I was home, it was different. If we were all home, half the mental pressure would be gone. Being displaced is the hardest part. We're all in the South now, where space is severely limited and we don't know anyone. Unlike the North, there are only low-rise buildings here incapable of housing so many people. If they had moved us to the north or to Gaza City, it might have been easier. Most of the large businesses and important infrastructure are in the north and the city, not here in the middle and the south. At least there, we wouldn't be struggling just for food. But much of that, the north and Gaza City, has been destroyed.
What makes a crime against humanity extraordinarily grave is that they are inflicted upon civilian populations and not necessarily during wartime. These crimes have been indisputably committed upon the Palestinian people. Each of these crimes has been materially facilitated and enabled by U.S. leadership. U.S. President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken have been particularly complicit in the crimes specific to Israel's war on Gaza. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, since 1946, The United States has provided over $300 billion in aid to Israel. Since the beginning of the 2024 fiscal year, the United States has provided $12.5 billion in military aid. Between 1980 and today, the United States has consistently provided at least $3 billion per year in military funding to Israel. The U.S. has spent over 15% of the $79 billion annual budget for primary and secondary education programs on arming Israel this year. The U.S. has used its UN Security Council veto power 12 times from February 2020 to February 2024 relating to crimes listed here. After the indicted individuals breached the purported red line of the named U.S. officials by invading Rafah, the Biden White House announced no change in policy and confirmed the non-existence of a red line when it comes to the mass slaughter of Gazan civilians and the perpetrating of these horrific crimes against humanity.
Thank you all for bearing witness to the evidence of the People's Court of Justice. We will now move to our closing statement, after which we will hear from our judges and the verdict will be announced. This court, having heard the people's evidence, will now consider the charges brought against the states of Israel and the United States, along with the individual defendants, Benjamin Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, Joseph Biden, Lloyd Austin, and Anthony Blinken, who stand accused of committing the most grave crimes of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. In closing, I will briefly summarize the people's evidence. Under the charge of genocide, the people's evidence included is in the form of statements directly from government representatives which call for the elimination of the population of Gaza through the collective punishment of its civilians, the destruction of its infrastructure, the elimination of its culture, educational and religious entities and structures. And this clearly demonstrates that Israel has committed and is continuing to commit genocide on the Palestinian people. The Israeli military's destruction of hospitals has not only gravely endangered neonatal care, but has deliberately jeopardized the very survival of newborn babies and their birth parents. The Israeli army has also exhumed entire cemeteries and buried Palestinians in countless mass graves, which has inflicted and will continue to inflict tremendous psychological trauma on the Gazan people. Under the charge of war crimes, the people's evidence includes the fact that the willful killing of 40,000 Palestinian civilians, numbers that do not include those unidentifiable or who remain under the rubble. And because the levels of destruction have depleted Gaza's capacity to count its dead, including by killing those in the health ministries, these numbers likely represent a fraction of those killed. Torture or inhumane treatment, including those in the desert camps, the detention centers, the refugee camps, those who have had their water, electricity, resources stripped under total blockage, those under the direct fire of war repeatedly fleeing with nowhere safe to go, and to each and every Palestinian person who endures with the mental and emotional anguish of family under these conditions, while individually existing stateless in a world that continues to deny the existence of our people and our rights. the taking of hostages, including the 5,000 plus Palestinian prisoners taken from their homes in night raids or from the streets in the middle of the day, men, women, and children taken without charge and arbitrarily detained in unreachable facilities where they are separated from their families, tortured, amputated, and experience unfathomable physical, sexual, and emotional violence. Unlawful deportation, transfer, or confinement, including those driven out of their homes in the ongoing Nakba, driven into safe zones, so-called safe zones, where they are attacked again and again with nowhere safe to go. Attacks on civilians and civilian objects such as schools, hospitals, and universities, leaving none left and no place safe for Gaza. Attacks on humanitarian aid and peacekeeping missions, such as the unprecedented killing of UN staff, journalists, and humanitarian aid workers. The use of prohibited weapons, such as white phosphorus gas, and the burning of children. Rape and other forms of sexual violence. The destruction and appropriation of property without military necessity and not justified by the exigencies of war, including over 85,000 of residential areas and homes in Gaza. And under the charge of crimes against humanity, the people's evidence includes murder, the intentional killing of individuals as part of widespread or systematic attacks on a civilian population, extermination, the mass killing of civilians by inflicting conditions of life intended to destroy the population, forcible transfer of a population, forcibly displacing individuals from their homes, imprisonment and the severe deprivation of physical liberty, to include Gaza under 17 years of blockade as the largest concentration camp where every single individual living is deprived of liberty, and now in these heightened times is trapped in an area they are forcibly left without any option for reprieve. Torture, the intentional infliction of severe physical and mental pain and suffering on individuals under the control of the perpetrator. Persecution, the severe deprivation of the fundamental rights against identifiable groups based on the political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, and religious grounds. Enforced disappearances of persons, arresting and detaining or abducting persons with the authorization of the state. And finally, apartheid, the inhumane acts committed in the context of an institutionalized, unseen, hidden regime of systematic oppression and domination by one group over another, with the intention of maintaining superiority over those subjugated. These acts are part of a widespread, intentional, systematic attack against the civilian population, and the perpetrators of these crimes knowingly commit them. The actions of the defendant not only breached international laws and conventions, but also caused untold suffering and devastation to an innocent people who cannot defend themselves nor flee. These heinous acts demand accountability and justice. The people move to determine the appropriate sentence for each defendant, considering the gravity of the crimes committed and the need for accountability and justice for all people of Palestine and for the conscience of the humanity of all people of the world. We will now pass these proceedings on to our honorable judging panel to share the deliberation process with us here. We will hear brief remarks from each member of our judging panel, and then we will move to a judge who will deliver the verdict.
Hello. After reviewing all the evidence provided, we, the judges, find the accused guilty of all charges. The truth, as a Palestinian man, I've been asked to be a judge today, and that's the first time ever in my life I'm not judged. I'm the one who's judging. So I had to ask for some guidance. And today I called three of my friends, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. And I asked them what they will say about what's going on. All three found the charged parties guilty. All three of them proud of you. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. May peace be upon us all. Today, on June 8th, 2024, I find myself answering the question of what connects me to Palestine. My answer is sheer humanity. I am no one to speak on another person's experience, nor am I superior to anyone to judge. Simply, I come here as a believing woman to use the privilege of my voice to bear witness when crimes against humanity are taking place. My friend Bilal is in Gaza right now. I can't tell you exactly where, since he's been displaced at least 6 times. He's told me he's losing track of the number. Bilal is an aspiring doctor, and instead of taking his final medical exams, he's writing testimony of one of the most brutal assaults that humanity has witnessed. I hadn't heard from him in a few days. I heard after an hour ago through his Instagram, which you can connect with. It's DRB13695, and you can read his live testimony even as of an hour ago. As someone who has experienced the trauma of violence, I'd like to remind us all of the mental toll and generational trauma that has brought us all to this moment. Bilal's last few sentences to me say, "Mentally, we are exhausted completely, and it's so hard to stay alive because we are in a dangerous zone. But we still try, and we hold on hoping every day that this nightmare will end soon. Faith and hope are the only things that make us get up in the morning. I am here today to end a genocide. I am here to do my best to put pressure on this government and its allies to free Palestine and put an end to the genocide and illegal occupation of Palestine. Enough is enough. Today, on June 8th, 2024, I and we charge the Zionist state of Israel with genocide. Today, I charge the U.S. government and President Genocide Joseph Biden with crimes against humanity and to be guilty on all charges. Lastly, free all Palestinian prisoners. Release all data collected during the surveillance of all Palestinians and give Palestinians the right to return, to resist, and to rebuild. Thank you.
My name is Salah Alul, and I am the daughter of a former Palestinian political prisoner. My father was thrown into an Israeli prison at the age of 15 for a felony he did not commit. He was an innocent teenager who was labeled as a criminal by the Israeli apartheid system. He was not offered a trial, a lawyer, and there was no justice served for his unlawful arrest. Israeli occupation forces pulled him out of his bed in the middle of the night to arrest him. He was a young boy who loved school and was interested in cinematography. and enjoyed a warm, simple meal of sabanich. Before that night, he had no clue that his whole life, his whole world would be changed. Living under the occupation was hard enough. The minute he walked into the jail, he was beaten and tortured to admit to a felony he did not commit. He was kept in isolation for an entire week before being imprisoned with other political prisoners. All these prisoners who were unlawfully arrested and held hostage. He was surrounded by political prisoners, but he was also surrounded by sons, fathers, workers, artists, professors, doctors, philosophers, and who else? Lawyers and judges. In political prison, my father was first introduced to the People's Court. Him and other prisoners would have mock trials. Someone would play the lawyer, the judge, the persecutor, the person being charged. A People's Court similar to the one you see before you today. They trained themselves to be ready if they ever needed to protect their people in a court of law. The justice system is a system filled with injustice. However, our people are educating themselves on their rights and all the ways Israel violates international law. Justice will be served, not just for my father, but for all the underage political Palestinian prisoners and hostages who have been arrested by Israeli occupation forces. Those tortured without a trial, with their mothers never sleeping because they don't know the whereabouts of their own child. Those given an Israeli lawyer who unlawfully dictates their future. With the People's Court, Israel will lose. We are here to ensure they are held accountable for their war crimes with real consequences and charge them with genocide. Palestine hurra, inshallah.
My name is Leah Mathadi, and I'm a Palestinian living in Washington, D.C. As a Palestinian living in the diaspora, I'm not so sure that my experiences are different than anyone else's with a heart that is paying attention. But we all are finding ways to stay connected to a truth that any non-member of the white, cis male ruling class knows in their heart. We're experiencing the failings of a system that wasn't built for us, a system that wasn't built for the well-being of women, children, queer, disabled, or brown, black, and indigenous people. Really, any other people other than the white, cis, male ruling class. People, mostly those that prescribe to the Western ideology that we must care for ourselves before our communities, says it can be self-inflicted trauma to pore over the posts of our bloodied bodies of our children or the footage of new mothers trying to care for their newborn babies now with fewer limbs. But how can we or anyone truly understand the urgency of this genocide and the 76-year occupation without bearing witness through our screens? We bear witness out of love and to bring justice. And why am I, a Palestinian living in the diaspora, qualified to make this judgment? Because I am a person of consciousness. But most importantly, I am the granddaughter of Mustafa and Hassan, who lived their lives in exile because of the settler, colonial, apartheid state of Israel. The granddaughter who was asked on a weekly basis growing up, "Min wen inti, where are you from?" And I'd reply, "Ana min Betanan, Palestine." The granddaughter who see these would not let us forget where we are from and what we must fight for in our lives. I am here as a daughter and granddaughter of Palestinians living in the belly of the beast to uphold our land and our people. There is no amount of justice that will ever honor our martyrs and our land, but we are here today to demand accountability and demand justice. We charge the Israeli state and the criminal living in the house behind us with genocide.
My name is Firas. and I'm a Palestinian living in the United States. For me to go back home, to see my family, to visit the homeland, I need the two-day trip just to get to my house under gunpoint, checkpoints, harassed, and terrorized for me and my family. That's their tactic of them trying to scare us to go back home, to forget our roots. But they don't know that we will never forget. The people here will never forget, and they will never forgive. You know, for me and my family, and not just my family, for everybody here that hears about Palestine from their parents, from their grandparents, from the land they cultivated with their bare hands since they are born. They're trying to take that away from us, but they never will. And we are here today and every single day, and we have shown that in the past 8 months that we will never give up. Those genocidal maniacs right behind us who are put into office to represent the people, to listen to the constituents and their demands. For the past 8 months, the people have took to the streets and listed and shouted their demands, but they're not listening. They forgot that we're the ones who put them there. But now we are here to judge them. We are here, all of us, to judge them on what they did for their genocide that they are committing to our people. And we hold them accountable to everything that they're doing.
I am Grace Lourdes Veñas Escafi Cajat. My maternal roots are of the Orthodox Christian communities in Beit Jala, and while my ancestors, Cajat, Catans, and Rabachs, arrived in Peru of their own will, for many of my cousins in diaspora, the reason Palestinians speak, say, Spanish instead of Arabic is Israel. The Zionist entity displaced and murdered millions, and those that were left in our homeland, it trapped in webs of oppression, siege, and brutality funded by the Western world. I am Palestinian, Peruvian, American, but today I call on us all to reject the notion that bias in any way discredits the truths that we speak. It is not on the grounds of my identity that I am opposed to genocide. Just as our Southeast Asian, queer, Black, Jewish, Indigenous, and all other marginalized allies are not opposed to it out of anything less than their basic humanity and an existential understanding of what it is to be oppressed. While we are all up here listing our qualifications, let me simultaneously question the existing global governance structures that have failed us. What right have the United Nations to judge when at every turn they impugn their own legitimacy by allowing one major beneficiary of the genocide, the United States, to veto ceasefire calls? What right has UNICEF, whose executive director, Catherine Russell, is married to the CEO of BlackRock, to judge when to enact justice and sanction Israel would require them to dictate global governance that does not benefit them? I am more qualified as a U.S. taxpayer to categorically oppose the use of my income and sales tax for war crimes. I am qualified as a communicator to oppose the reductive and deceitful rhetoric used to falsely justify genocide and demonize Arab and minority resistances. I'm qualified as a human being to categorically oppose the brutality that we are shown through our phone screens, always watching with the terrible knowledge that all of the destruction and death that we see has so much more that we don't behind it. But beyond any qualification to judge these crimes, I have a responsibility to do so, as do we all.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. My name is Jumana Al-Hanti. I'm a daughter of Palestine whose family was ethnically wiped from their cities, Al-Abbasiyya and Al-Lid, remember my cities, in 1948. Born in Kuwait, then displaced to Jordan because of the war, the Gulf War, when I finished, where I finished medical school and finally ended up in the United States to finish higher education. My story is a typical story of a Palestinian in the diaspora. I'm a proud mother of 6 kids. a neurologist, and an activist. I just came back from Gaza. I went there on a medical mission for 2 weeks, but ended up staying for 3 weeks after the Rafah crossing was occupied and closed. I witnessed firsthand the horrific situation there. There are no words that can describe what I saw. Hearing is nothing like seeing. I know you have been bombarded by the influx of pictures and videos of the injured and massacred, but I'm here to tell you that seeing those grievous atrocities being committed in real time is 1,000,000 times worse than any video out there. Seeing the devastating destruction of hospitals, schools, houses, farms cannot be described or portrayed through a 30-second video. While I was there, going to the ICU was the hardest when I was there. I will never forget the noises of all the malfunctioning monitors and ventilators beeping. The children with extensive burns getting Tylenol for pain. The lack of sterility and sanitation, and having one nurse for 15 ICU beds. That's horrific. All this is still going, as you know, and getting worse by the minute. But I also dealt with another group of sick people who have been forgotten. Those are the ones who are suffering in silence with no medical care, no support, and no resources. Some of them have died of natural causes, but we all know that if it wasn't for the genocide, they would have had a chance. Patients with CP, cerebral palsy, autism, Parkinson's, seizures, MS, strokes, who have not had a chance to see a doctor or even get their medications for months. And we should not forget the healthcare workers of Gaza. These are the superheroes of the world, the most resilient. I've listened to their stories and broke down every time I heard them. They have endured so much suffering. After getting displaced several times, going from one hospital to the other, witnessing the destruction of these hospitals, and the killing of hundreds of people right in front of them. Some of them were taken hostages, humiliated, questioned, and tortured, and then released with only the clothes on their backs to the south, where their families are still in the north. They did not know if their families have survived or not, and that was for months. One of them told me when he heard his mom's voice on the phone after a few months, he collapsed, he fainted. These heroes are still volunteering their time and efforts in the European hospital. They're the most amazing people I've ever seen in my life. Everyone in Gaza has a story. Everyone has a horrific story. There is no justification for this genocide, and justice has to prevail. We find the United States and Israel guilty on all charges.
Hello, my name is Samar Hussein Langhorn, and I am Bint Akka, daughter of Akka, Palestine, 1948. And I am a proud granddaughter and daughter of Palestinian refugees. I'm here to give my Palestinian people agency, something they have tried the most to take away from us. They tried to take our humanity, our agency, everything from us. But they have failed miserably, because I stand here in front of you today, like all of you, fighting and pushing for the Palestinian people to stay alive, and we are here. We all heard the heartbreaking testimonies of our continued annihilation since 1975, and I'm here to charge Israel and the U.S. with war crimes and genocide, and to let them know they will not win. Free Palestine!
Good evening, all. I'll make this brief as a judge today on the People's Court. My name is no longer important, as the names of our children, the seeds of the future, do not have the dignity of honing Asma'a home, as they were ripped away from this world by the hands of the IOF. As my comrades have said, we speak as the people of consciousness, and as a person with a conscience, I recognize I am a product of the Zionist occupation. I am a product of the Zionist ethnic erasure of Palestinians. I am a product of the Zionist forced diaspora of Palestinians. My grandfather, Hassan Abdul Latif Amara, a refugee in Jordan, fled his home at 6 years old in 1948. The journey of life, land, and dignity embedded in his soul carried my people, my family, out of Israel's colonial entity and into safer landscapes so that we may continue to prosper in any way possible, whether that is the U.S. or across the ocean. Here in America, however, we must fight the force that is the United States government and all of Western imperial control, which has consistently conspired with the Israeli settlers in Gaza and Palestine as a whole. So that our place as Palestinians in this country is not just to be a representation of our steadfastness and resilience, but a symbol of responsibility to support our people from all corners of the world, from all directions of the globe, local and international. Our mobilized communities are building profound change, justice, and under this court of law, equity. This is the People's Court, because our voices involved in the decisions over genocide under international law are just and true. And no matter what their rank, their power in the Zionist government, they will never strip us of the power to come together as a united front in solidarity for all oppressed people. And today, Palestine, Gaza, and our martyred brothers and sisters in Rafah. We charge the Zionist entity and the U.S. government guilty of all war crimes committed since 1948 and from October 7th to 2023 and on.
Hello. My name is Matez. My father's name is Abdul Aziz. My father grew up in the Shuja'iyya refugee camp in Gaza. If you don't know anything about the Shuja'iyya refugee camp, I'll tell you one fun fact. It's nicknamed the death trap in Gaza because anytime the IOF tries to raid it, they usually get the highest number of casualties and deaths. Shuja'iyya refugee camp. The death trap. My dad, growing up, he wouldn't really sort of on his own share a lot of the stories from his life growing up. I can't tell you exactly why. He's a little socially awkward as a guy, but I imagine that retelling these stories is not something that's super fun. But he did once, of course, out of nowhere, drop a story on me where he said, told me when he was maybe 4 or 5 years old, he was hanging out on the balcony, and there was this sort of IOF troop, squad, whatever, walking through, and he remembers this very vividly, despite being at a very young age. They were just pretty much whenever they wanted to, they could enter a house, an apartment, raid it, you know, claiming they suspect something's going on, and that was it. So he's this kid on the balcony, and they look up, they point at him, and he, you know, starts freaking out, because who wouldn't? And then describes to me this whole story of how they sort of came in, raided the apartment. Him and his 9 siblings and his parents were just sort of laid out on the floor, kind of told to get out of the way, and they pretty much robbed the apartment. They robbed clothes, they took a bunch of the electronics they had, appliances, and left. The sad thing is, in Gaza, after being raided, that is a very positive outcome. That's really the tragedy of it all, is that they didn't go in and shoot them. They didn't go in and beat them. They just took their things. And that story sticks with me every single day. Every single day. Not because of just how grave it is, but just because of the normalizing nature of it. Like, he was telling me this and laughing, just sharing it as if it's another story from his life. And, you know, that's a testament to the willpower of our people, to the willpower of the resistance, both on the ground, you know, the guys, and our people who resist just in their day-to-day existence, insisting that their humanity will not be taken away, no matter how enraged, no matter how depraved the Zionists are. They insist with every fiber of their being, their humanity will not be taken away, because we are better than the Zionists. We are way better than the Zionists. Today, we saw that over 200 were killed in the Nusayrat refugee camp. They hid in an 8-truck. Just think about that. They hid in an 8-truck in order to murder, massacre Palestinians. We charge them with genocide. We charge them with every conceivable and also inconceivable war crime that anyone could have imagined. And we charge them with having no right to exist, honestly, because how can Zionism continue to exist? How can anyone expect Palestinians to sit by or coexist by these people who have created an entire state ideology that is predicated upon not just massacring them, but humiliating them and disgracing them every single day in such a normal way? It's just what life is in Israeli society, is to just put down Palestinians as much as they can all the time. So we charge them with genocide. We charge them with all the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and inshallah, we will liberate Palestine. It's inevitable. It will come. It will come. I'm so sure of it, because Zionism has to fall, and it will fall. Thank you.
After including testimonies, documents, and expert analysis, the people deliver the following verdict. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented and the legal standards applied, this court finds the State of Israel and its actors, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, guilty on all charges. The United States and its actors, President Joe Biden, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, guilty on all charges. It has become an undeniable fact that Israel's actions in Gaza are in violation of international law, and we can see that the United States has acted to aid and abet them, protecting them from accountability and continuing to support them in their genocide. Thanks to the brave Palestinian people and journalists who have risked life and limb to share their reality with the world, Israel's actions and words have become their own undoing, their own confession of guilt. From the destruction of farms, homes, and hospitals to the torture, death, and starvation they unleash upon the population, it is clear they are committing genocide. They are committing war crimes. They are committing crimes against humanity. As much as they deny it, as much as they try to justify their actions, the people can see the truth. They are trying to decimate Palestinian life and history, and our government is helping them to carry out this atrocious death and this atrocious deed. We have spent hours together here, and yet we know that we have only scratched the surface of the charges that we could find Israel and the U.S. guilty of perpetrating. But that's still more than enough. The people find the state of Israel and the United States guilty today, but we know that they became guilty as soon as one martyr was killed, as soon as they dared to steal 1 inch of Palestinian land. The front of international law is an opportunity to highlight the international community's solidarity with Palestine, a solidarity largely hidden from us in the belly of imperialism in an effort to make us feel isolated and alone. But despite those efforts, we are seeing international bodies demand ceasefires and countries recognizing the state of Palestine. We know that the world stands with Palestine. But these actions are long overdue. The entire framework of the international rules-based order is designed in order to conceal, defend, and protect those that perpetrate the most horrific crimes against people across the world. Our government is at the heart of this insidious agenda. We feel it each time they veto yet another ceasefire charge, or as they attempt to sanction the institutions and countries holding Israel accountable. Yet over the past 8 months, the officials right here in Washington have felt the people's justice at everywhere they turn, as we, as a movement, have reminded them of their leading role in perpetrating the crime of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity against the Palestinian people. Today, we judge Israel and the U.S. to be guilty on a legal basis. But as we draw a red line around the White House, we know that our justice extends far beyond. We are taking a moral and human stance that points out what should be obvious, that Israel's actions are a stain on humanity, that our freedom is intertwined with Palestinian freedom, because those that oppress and fund their death are the same bodies that steal our taxes to fund injustice abroad. Shame. Instead of funneling our hard-earned resources towards our communities, towards our livelihood, we see them use our labor to continue to steal from the people all over the world. Today is another day for people's justice, for reminding us and the world that we know exactly who is responsible and who must pay for these immense atrocities. With this verdict, we honor all the Palestinian lives lost in pursuit of settler colonialism. We remember their lives, but we also take their martyrdom as a charge to us to continue building our movement. To us, the preservation of a true democracy is not upheld only through the herd. To learn and see for themselves what the reality of their oppression is, and to insist upon change. In order to honor our martyrs, we must hold our red line, demanding our governments take responsibility for their complicity and crying out for a free Palestine. And we will not rest until Palestine is free. As the late Honduran martyr Berta Cáceres said in 2016, impunity is not eternal. The people know how to get justice. That is exactly what we have done here today. Every time we document, indict, and convict these people for what they are, war criminals, we build our confidence in the just cause of our fight. We strengthen our knowledge so we can continue taking the streets and disrupting business as usual during a genocide. We forge a path towards a true liberatory justice. Just as we have come here today demanding accountability from these war criminals and putting the people's red line in action, we will continue to come and fight for justice and liberation. We are unwavering. We are unafraid and unrelenting. We will continue to fight, continue to disrupt, continue continue to agitate until total and complete liberation for all oppressed peoples.
Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
Long live Palestine!
From the river to the sea!
From the river to the sea!
Palestine will be free!
Palestine will be free!
And from the sea to the river!
From the sea to the river!
Palestine will live forever!
Palestine will live forever!
Please help me give it up one more time for our team here today, who worked tirelessly to make this happen. I'd also like to give it up for the people in the background and our lawyers. Raise your hands. All the organizers, everyone who's been here, it wasn't lost upon me that we have access to water in this heat. And so for us to be here, this is community, this is companionship, and this is what they're so afraid of. So, Hurriya, Hurriya!
Hurriya, Hurriya!
Palestine Arabia!
Palestine Arabia!
Who here is from the DMV? I knew you guys were here. I really wanted us to come together for a second and reflect on the day that we've had, the success of the people forming their own red line around the White House. The Palestinian experience is a unique experience. We went into today hearing the news of over 200 martyrs in Gaza. And so the grief that we felt throughout this day cannot be understated. But the happiness that we felt being in community together, showing up in the tens of thousands surrounding that war criminals building and all the war criminals in heart of empire. Today marks a new phase. A phase of the red lines that the people get to draw, that the people get to hold, that the people get to determine what the red line is. Because the people are the red line. I want to thank everybody who stayed until the very end. I want to thank all the organizers who put in all of this effort the past few weeks to make this happen. The day that this was announced was at the People's Conference for Palestine in Detroit. Another historic moment for Palestinians in the diaspora. And we will continue to make history. And we will continue to challenge every single war criminal. We will continue to confront Zionism and imperialism and all forms of settler colonialism, no matter where we are in the world. And it goes to show that the West Coast, that Canada, and that countries all over the world participated today in the red line of the people. So join me in one last chant. From D.C. to Palestine. The people are the red line. From D.C. to Palestine. The people are the red line. The people are the red line. Biden, Biden, we're not done. The Intifada's just begun. Biden, Biden, we're not done. The Intifada's just begun. Free, free Palestine.
Free, free Palestine.
Free, free Gaza. And we will continue to mobilize and flood these streets all over the U.S., internationally. We will continue to mobilize until all our demands are met, until all our prisoners are free, until the siege on Gaza is lifted, until there is an end to the occupation. Thank you, everybody.